Started yesterday, but the Bloc is viewing this as the big kickoff day at the U.S. consulate in Quebec City, and then the launch from here. And what's interesting, the Bloc has had a bus, but now a full reporter bus to cover all of the aspects of the Bloc campaign. What's happening with the Trump tariff threats in the administration and the talk about sovereignty in 51st state. Interestingly, in Quebec, it's kind of even rallied Quebecers to a unity message and a patriotic Canadian message. So, as we see, hold on, there is Monsieur Blanchet getting set to get on that bus to set things up.
C'est la troisième, puis je me suis dit qu'à partir de maintenant, on pourrait les acheter puis les garder.
It's the third one. You can keep them and use them again.
C'est là que ça part.
And here it starts, gets underway.
Bonjour, merci d'être venu.
Je choisis le Québec. There is the motto. I choose Quebec from Yves-François Blanchet as he gets on the bus to head off. And it's just interesting. He has been urging voters in Quebec to give the Bloc Quebecois the balance of power in a potential minority government situation. So we will watch that very closely, listen in as the day continues, if he stops to make further campaign announcements or to meet voters throughout the province. 36 days to go until the vote on April the 28th, and the markets are 4 minutes in. Scott, any impact there, or what are we watching for as we start this trading week?
Well, Canada, the TSX is full of a lot of material stocks. We're seeing the price of oil up. We're seeing the price of things like gold flirting with records, and of course a lot of the commodities that are under threat with those tariffs up in price as well. So the first few minutes in, we are looking at green markets, some optimism out there that maybe the U.S. tariffs might not be across-the-board tariffs and more specific globally as well as in Canada as well. That's the optimism in regards to the April 2 deadline there. In the meantime, let's take a look at the markets. We finished in positive territory on Friday, and it's looking like more optimism this morning. We are seeing the price of oil $68 and holding. We have the Canadian dollar up about 1/10 of a cent, all a vote of stabilization and stability and confidence in the elections going forward. And let's take a look at the market, starting with the TSX in positive territory. Last I looked in the first 4 minutes, very positive, up 300 points, with the Dow Jones, the S&P, NASDAQ also in positive territory as well. So a little bit of optimism as we head towards or are in the first 5 minutes of this trading session.
Thanks, Scott.
Excellent.
This market update is brought to you by Emirates. Fly Emirates. Fly better.
coming back to these images from about 1 hour ago. Liberal leader Mark Carney arriving in Gander, Newfoundland. He's set to meet with voters and to deliver remarks later this morning. Of course, full coverage ahead on CBC News Network. Ashley Burke is traveling with Mark Carney and covering the Liberal campaign. And Ashley is live with us this morning. So, Ashley, good morning. Welcome. Let the campaign begin. I look forward to our conversation so very much. Set up today. What's on the agenda in Gander for the Liberal leader?
Well, Heather, I'm on the tarmac right now where the snow is really starting to come down. And this is an area that they've chosen on day two because of its history. Gander is a place where during the Second World War, Canadian and American troops, they served alongside each other here. This was a place where the town was overseeing the movement of Allied aircraft heading to Europe. And also, famously, this town is a place that brought in and helped thousands of stranded passengers after the 9/11 attack on the U.S. And that's something that Mark Carney is going to be tapping into today. He's meeting with a family, or is expected to meet with a family this morning, who brought in American, also and Irish passengers. And then he's going to be addressing the media. We're expecting his speech to really center around the Canada-U.S. relationship as he continues to try and pitch himself to Canadians as someone who wants a strong and positive mandate, in his words, to fight the U.S. trade war. He's trying to position himself as the best person for that job. He's also talked about how Canada needs to basically protect itself from the U.S. with more trading partners, other security partners. And that's kind of the key message we're expecting to hear from him again today. I was at a rally last night, and that's kind of the biggest round of applause that he got when he talked about how one of his lines was that Trump wants to own us, but he said he's not going to allow that to happen. He's also trying to position Pierre Poilievre and liken him to Trump. That's something that also got a big applause at the rally we were at last night.
Ashley, looking at pictures of that rally on the inside, but not everybody was applauding. There were protests outside. It was his first, occasion dealing with protesters. It had to do with the fishery. Tell us about what the issue was and how things were resolved.
Yeah, unlike Mark Carney's opponents, this is his first election campaign. This was the first day, the first rally of that campaign. Before we got there, there was more than 100 fish harvesters who were protesting that were in the lobby. And by the time I got there and went and checked, they'd been pushed outside. They'd been asked by the police to go outside, and the doors had been locked. So I could see people trying to open the door and get in. Police were not allowing that to happen. And they were upset about big cuts to the quota, to the quota that they were protesting when it came to king crab. And Mark Carney, to handle this, he acknowledged at the top of the speech that the demonstrators were there. He said he acknowledged them, that he went to listen to what they had to say, and also that he said the new government has asked them to look at the structure of the ministry, because there was complaints about how the Liberal candidate who's running again had been handling the file. So that's what happened on his first rally of his campaign. We're expecting that we're going to be in Atlantic Canada for the rest of the day, a place where the Liberals are leading right now in the polls. Heather?
All right, Ashley, brush yourself off, head indoors, but I appreciate this so much. What a start for the weather for you. Oh, my goodness. 36 days to go, and Ashley Burke covering the Liberals for us today. Thanks again. And we'll have live coverage again when we see the Liberal leader with those voters and bring it to you live as he makes an announcement later today. Let's take a look at the White House again. The breaking news coming in from the White House just now. Katie Simpson in our Washington bureau following up with a White House official about potential tariffs coming April 2nd. Now, these are what the White House calls sectoral tariffs, like the tariffs already in effect on Canadian steel and aluminum. The White House official is telling Katie there is no final decision yet on whether additional sectoral tariffs will take effect April the 2nd. We know that's the same day the Trump administration is set to bring in reciprocal tariffs, global tariffs, also the day the pause on across-the-board tariffs on Canadian goods is supposed to end. So I was mentioning with Marcy Sirks just moments ago, fresh uncertainty there. Katie will be following up very intently, I'm sure, and we'll have developments on all of this breaking news here on CBC News Network. Let's bring you the regional picture this morning as we're going to day by day through this federal election campaign. Ontario has the most ridings in the country, 122 in total of the 343 nationally. And the Greater Toronto Area, the GTA, as you'll hear, it's a major battleground once again. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is going to be appearing in Brampton, Ontario in just about 15 minutes. And we do expect to see the leaders make plenty of stops in the 905 and 406 area codes through the campaign. Megan Fitzpatrick begins her campaign coverage in Brampton ahead of that Poilievre address coming up a little bit later on. Megan, good morning. Set the scene for us where you are.
Good morning, Heather. We're in the parking lot of the factory, the plant where Pierre Poilievre is going to be making an announcement around 10 a.m. this morning. We are in Brampton, currently in the riding of Brampton East. This is one of the all-important GTA ridings that all the parties will be trying to win in this campaign. As you mentioned, Ontario, 122 ridings across the province. That's up one from the last time we had a federal election in 2021. And like other parts of Canada, the riding boundaries have changed in several parts of this province. A number of ridings in Toronto and the GTA, more than 50 of them. This is an important region for all the parties on their paths to victory. And here in Brampton specifically, Heather, there's an extra riding, an additional riding. Now 6 of them in this part of the province, up from 5 the last time. And that's in part because of how quickly this city of Brampton has been growing in recent years. It's now the 7th largest city in Canada. The population is just under 800,000 people. And all of those ridings in Brampton currently held by the Liberals. This is a Liberal stronghold, part of the Greater Toronto Area. And the Conservatives in particular are targeting these ridings. And that is why we are seeing the Conservative Party leader coming almost immediately to the Greater Toronto Area. He arrived in the city of Toronto last night for a rally, a well-attended rally that had a huge crowd. They even had to turn people away. Now this morning he's in Brampton for this announcement. Later today he's going to Mississauga, also part of the Greater Toronto Area. And we know later today NDP leader Jagmeet Singh will be arriving in Toronto as well. So you're seeing, Heather, very early on with tracking where the leaders are making some of their first stops, just how important the Toronto region is in this campaign.
And what are voters telling you, Megan? You're going to be every day talking to people, canvassing opinions, and then sharing them with us. So far in Brampton, what's on those voters' minds?
So far, the common theme I'm hearing is affordability, cost of living issues. People definitely have those issues on their minds. Let's take a listen to what I heard from 2 voters I spoke to this morning.
There's a housing crisis from what I've heard. It's like really hard for people to buy homes, find homes, and I would hope that they're finding out ways to rectify these issues, because it's extremely concerning for my future and like my family, my siblings, everyone's future really.
Like say with rent, it is expensive. It's bad. It's bad. And then I have my mother telling me at my age it was affordable to have a house, it was affordable to rent. You could do it just on one income. It's just now you can't.
Another person I talked to, Heather, saying he's looking to hear about tax cuts in this campaign, an income tax cut. And interesting, we have been hearing about that already from some of the party leaders. In fact, Pierre Poilievre making that announcement this morning, Mark Carney making that an income tax announcement yesterday on day 1 of the campaign. So in general, that's what I'm hearing so far. People definitely concerned about the cost of living these days, affordability likely to be a dominant theme throughout this campaign. We're going to head inside and listen to the Conservative Party leader. We'll see if there's any voters in there or any workers potentially at this plant that we can talk to and hear a bit more about what's on their minds. Heather?
Okay, Megan, thank you so very much. Megan Fitzpatrick live from Brampton. Thank you again. So as we wait to hear from Pierre Poilievre in Brampton, in Gatineau, Quebec, he launched his campaign. That's the area just across from Parliament, where he lived when he began his federal career back in 2004. Ian Brody is a former chief of staff for former Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He's going to join us weekly, and we were speaking earlier this morning about the Conservative leader's strategy. And by launching his campaign even ahead of the official launch from Mark Carney yesterday, what does that suggest about trying to control the narrative?
Keep in mind, in 2006, the campaign landscape was a little bit different because there was still a daily news cycle. And so our imperative was to be out first in the morning, as early as we possibly could, with a big announcement, and to make the Liberals respond to the issues that we wanted to raise. Whatever the Liberals were talking about later on in the day, the news media and everybody else around them would force them to respond to issues that we had started the day with. In a campaign, you want to set that priority, force the other candidates to respond to you. You set the terms of the debate and therefore the nature of the struggle between the two parties. We don't really have a daily news cycle anymore. We have like, 4 or 5 news cycles in a day, an hourly news cycle. There's the speed of this is picked up. And so that pressure to set the terms of the debate and then carry it through the day is much more difficult than it was 20 years ago. It's true, Poilievre was out early in an effort to put, his preferred messages on the public agenda, in a sense to force Carney to respond. If Carney is going to sort of play policy catch-up throughout the campaign, that's probably a good strategy. But trying to sustain that through the day is very difficult. I think the piece that I noticed was Poilievre closing last night with a colossally large campaign rally, really the biggest Conservative campaign rally in the Toronto area in a very
Ian Brody, as we bring you some Conservative insight. Now we want to take you to Montreal. And you're going to hear here from NDP leader Jagmeet Singh with some of the Quebec candidates. You see Alexandre Bouleris there with the hat and the Burberry scarf. It's the only, or the pattern scarf, that is the only existing NDP MP from Quebec right now. Let's listen into the NDP leader as they begin their quest to win more seats in Quebec.
We were here 4 years ago, and I have a picture here, and it's important to look at that picture. Maybe there's a bit more snow on our beards today or on the land around us, but it's exactly the same place where we were with Alexandre 4 years ago. And 4 years ago, we said, look, these are federal lands. And our plan is to use federal lands to build housing, off-market housing, social housing, affordable housing. And 4 years ago, the Liberal government did nothing. In 4 years, they did nothing. As you can see, that's incredible. In the city of Montreal, and I imagine here a community with 2,000 off-market apartments that are affordable for families and young people, for people. And the Liberals did nothing. So my plan, and I think we should use all federal lands across the country to build 100% affordable and social housing off-market. And we can do that. We can do it, and we have to do it. But what is the plan of the other leaders? Pierre Poilievre has been clear. He wants to sell these lands to real estate giants, like the former company owned by Mark Carney. These are federal lands, and Poilievre wants to sell them to real estate giants to build housing that would not be affordable. It would be very expensive housing. And Mark Carney also wants to sell off these federal lands to real estate giants to, create housing that will be anything but affordable. So, in this election, the question is who will fight for you? Who will build the housing that you need? That is the real question. And the answer is not the Liberals, not the Conservatives, it's the NDP. We will build housing for you. So that is really the question right now. Who will fight for you? Not for real estate giants, not for rich investors, not for big developers, but for you. And the answer is clear, because our plan is to build housing for you. So we know that there is a huge need for housing. So the plan is to build at least 100,000 units in the first phase, 100,000 units, 100% off market on federal lands to help families. We will train 100,000 workers to build those housing units, and we will get the funding through the communities. It will be non-profit, and that will help people. So in this election, again, the question is, if you want someone to fight for you, if you want someone who's going to build housing for you and your family, well, the answer is the NDP will do that for you.
Merci. Friends, we are up. First, I want to thank our incredible candidates. Thank you, Nima. Thank you, Craig. And to all the incredible candidates that we have. I'm so proud that we've got incredible people running on our team. And most importantly, these are folks that are going to fight for you. So we are here to announce our plan. I think in this election, the question is, who's going to build homes you can actually afford? Because when I talk to people, everywhere I go, they say, I can't find a place that's affordable. I can't find a place that I can afford to rent. I simply cannot find anything. And for those people, I want to let you know that I hear you. It's frustrating. I can see why you're so angry, because there's nothing there that's affordable. And so we're going to fight for you. Our plan is, when we see federal land, we want to use all of it, 100% of federal land that's usable, to build homes that are affordable, homes that are non-market housing, homes that are truly affordable, where you can actually afford to call your own, a home to put a roof over your head, a place to call your own. That's what we want to do. Now, the reason why we're here today is there's a picture. This picture, there might be a bit more white in my beard, as there is more white on the ground. But this is the exact same place we were 4 years ago. We said this is federal land owned entirely by the federal government. This should be used to build homes. 4 years later, the Liberals did nothing. Nothing has been done here. This is very incredible land in the middle, in the community of Montreal. This could be, behind me, I imagine, a community where thousands of affordable homes are built, where people can live, they can grow up, young people can come here, seniors can come here. This is a community I see. But the Liberals have failed to build anything here. And here's the reason why. Our plan is, let's build 100% affordable homes on federal land across this country. Everywhere there's federal land, we want to see homes being built that are affordable. We want to hire and train 100,000 workers to build these homes, and we want to unleash the funding, the financing to make this happen. The difference is, here's the plans of the other guys. Pierre Poilievre wants to sell off federal land. He wants to sell it off, all of it, to rich developers and rich builders, and build homes that you cannot afford. That's his plan. He wants to sell it off to companies like Mark Carney's former company, so that they can make lots of profits, and they're not in it for you. And Mark Carney's plan, very similarly, he wants to sell off this land and build mostly homes that you can't afford. Neither of these guys are in it for you. So the question in this election is, who's going to build homes that you can actually afford? Who's going to fight for you? Not for rich developers, not for big builders. So again, the question in this election is, who's in it for you? And the answer to that question is New Democrats. We're in it for you. We want to build homes that you can actually afford. So I'll wrap up by saying we're up against a serious challenge. But one concrete step we can take is, for all the land that we own federally, if we use it to build homes that families and young people and seniors can actually afford, we can take a concrete and solid step forward towards building homes that are actually there for you when you need it, that are actually affordable for people. And finally, I just want to point out something. You're going to hear the millionaire tax cut plan from Pierre Poilievre, and you just heard one from Mark Carney. Both of their plans for tax cuts for millionaires are exactly that. They're plans that help out millionaires more than they help out everyday families. That is not a way to actually help in this difficult time. That's not going to help out folks out there that are saying, you know what, I'm struggling to get by. A tax plan that gives more to millionaires is exactly what we know conservatives are going to do. And sadly, that's what Mark Carney's plan is as well. His plan is a plan, if you look at it, millionaires benefit the most. That is not a tax plan that's for working people. That's not a tax plan for the middle class. We're going to release our tax plan. And I can tell you, our tax plan is one that's actually going to help you and your family, not the millionaires, not the billionaires. Finalement, je vais ajouter,
And
en
finally,
français
I'd
ici,
just like to add as well that we've just seen the tax plans of the Conservatives and Liberals. The plan proposed by Pierre Poilievre is not surprising. It's going to help millionaires more than everyday Canadians. And it's the same thing with Mark Carney. He has proposed a plan, a tax plan, that will help millionaires rather than everyday Canadians or workers. And that's not the right thing to do. So we will introduce our own tax plan. And I can assure you that our plan will help workers, will help everyday Canadians, not billionaires and millionaires. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. On va passer à la période de questions maintenant. En français d'abord. We'll take the questions in English after the French. Vous pouvez donner votre nom et votre média, premier média.
Bonjour, Juliane Lapointe de Radio-Canada.
Radio-Canada.
Justement là-dessus, je rebondis sur ce que vous venez de
Yes,
dire.
in relation to what you just said, Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre have promised tax cuts. Do you agree that those revenues, could you please repeat your question? It's on the tax cuts. Do you think that it's a good thing? Are you concerned that this would be that this would generate a lot of revenue and that could be used for certain things? Well, my criticism of Mark Carney and Pierre Poilievre is that what they're proposing will mean that someone who earns $500,000 will receive the same amount as someone who earns $40,000, and that makes no sense. That's not a good plan if you give the same amount of money to someone who earns a lot of money and the same amount to someone who earns less money. That clearly shows that their plan is a plan to help the ultra-rich. It's a plan to help millionaires. It's not a plan to help everyday Canadians. So, no, I don't agree with a plan that does not help workers or everyday Canadians. So our plan, and we will be presenting that plan, and it will help people who need help, not millionaires. We will not present a plan that provides for the same amount to be given to millionaires as to someone with less means. So we will present a plan that helps the middle class. On another issue, I'd like to know what you think of the comments made by Danielle Smith to U.S. media. Is it your view that she is fostering foreign interference in this Canadian election? I think it's disgraceful what Danielle Smith is proposing. She is proposing that Donald Trump wait a few minutes or wait a little while before he hurts our country. She is suggesting to Donald Trump that he take measures that will hurt the Liberal Party rather than defending our country. We, as political leaders, have to make decisions that help people. We shouldn't be talking about how we can hurt another political party, even if it is negative, the effect is negative on Canadians. So a Conservative leader suggesting to the President to hurt Canadians so that the Conservative Party can win is really disgraceful. And I think it shows a total lack of respect for workers. It shows a total lack of respect for people, for the citizens of this country. And as far as I'm concerned, what we need to do is be united and work together to address these attacks by Donald Trump and look after each other. We have to show solidarity. And that is a true Canadian value, and it's a true NDP value. Hello, Mr. Singh. I'd like to come back to the promise of tax cuts from the Conservatives. You say it will benefit the ultra-rich, but also people with less income who have certain needs. So those people could be interested in those tax cuts. What is your response? Well, certainly we have to help people. There's no doubt about that. There has to be a change in our policies so that we can help everyday Canadians. But is it reasonable to propose a measure that gives the same amount of money to someone who earns $500,000 and the same amount to someone who earns $50,000? No, that is not the right approach, but that is Pierre Poilievre's approach. He's proposing to give exactly the same amount of money to someone who doesn't need money, who already has a lot of money. So once again, that shows that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives are on the side of the ultra-rich. What we need is help for people. We proposed removing the GST on monthly bills and essential goods. That is a measure that will help disproportionately the middle class. We will be proposing a tax plan ourselves that will target people who need help, the middle class, not millionaires. And Mark Carney, it's disappointing, but he's doing the same thing. His tax plan will disproportionately help the ultra-rich. And once again, in these times, the question is that the right thing to do, to help the ultra-rich, to help people who already are earning $500,000 or $1 million a year? No, it's not the right thing to do. We should be helping people who need help. That's the middle class, the working class, workers. That's exactly what we will do. And with respect to your plan, when should people expect to see the details about tax cuts, and what are you going to propose? Well, we've already mentioned a number of things, but we will be presenting a specific tax plan very soon. And today, our plan is about housing, and we're talking about what we can do to increase off-market, non-market housing at a reasonable price, and we will be making an announcement on our tax plan. But what we've already said is that approach that helps workers is to remove the GST on monthly bills, for example, the internet, your cell phone, your heating bill. Those are bills where if you remove the GST, that will disproportionately help workers. So our approach, and it's very different from the other parties, is to target the middle class, to target people who need help, not millionaires, not CEOs, not rich investors. Our plan is about you, because we are on your side, and we're in it for you. We're in it to fight for you. Presse canadienne. I hope you're not too cold out here. No, it is cold, but you know, we're dressed properly for the event. Now, your plan on housing, I'd like you to give a few more details. For example, if you use these federal lands, who will become owners of the housing units? Are you talking about low-cost housing? How do you think this will work unless you have people involved to do the building and so forth? Now, that is a good question, and I'd like to give you more details. So rather than using the conservative and liberal approach, which is to sell these federal lands, sell them off, we want to keep the federal lands. So we remain owners of the lands. And there are three issues when we're talking about housing. First of all, the first challenge is land. We have federal lands. The second challenge is people to build housing units. We have a plan to train 100,000 workers to build affordable housing. And finally, it's a question of funding. So that's a big part of our plan. We're going to provide a fund and work together with other partners to build housing. So I'm talking about community organizations who are already working in the housing field, and we will get loans at a very low interest level so that it's affordable. We're talking about working together with community organizations and keeping the land, but working with these organizations to build housing. And the goal is to have off-market, affordable housing, social housing for people, not to enrich big investors, but to help young people, seniors, and people in general. My second question is more general. What do you say to people who have criticized you for supporting a very unpopular government and tearing up your agreement and keeping them in power? Well, what I'm saying is that what we did over the years was to try and implement social programs that would help people. For example, dental care. We fought very hard to make that a reality. The Liberals said no every step of the way. They resisted or they tried to slow things down every single time. But we did not give up. We worked hard, we fought, and right now in Quebec, more than 500,000 people have received dental care thanks to our efforts. More than 1 million people here in Quebec, not in the rest of Canada, but only in Quebec. More than 1 million people have registered for the program. And now recently, we were able to get through the final phase, which is that everyone earning $90,000 or less can access that care. Now, what did the Conservatives do? Nothing. And in addition, the Bloc that presents itself as the defender of Quebecers voted against. They voted against dental care, in spite of the fact that this helps a large proportion of Quebecers. And the fact that so many Quebecers have registered for the program shows that. And the Bloc voted against. So they talk about defending Quebecers and saying they'll support whatever is good for Quebec. But the fact is they did the exact opposite. They voted against a measure that helps people. They also voted against pharmacare. And we were able to bring in pharmacare in a number of provinces where diabetic medications are going to be free in 3 provinces, thanks to our efforts. So that's what we have done, and it was a real battle. We fought to make that happen, and when I say that we're going to build affordable housing, you can believe us, because we have delivered for Canadians. We used our power, and we helped people, and we can still do that. Thank you.
They're now taking the English questions. Sure. Tell your name and your media, please.
Yes.
Hi, Christy Kirkup with the Globe and Mail. Mr. Singh, I know you addressed this in French, but I wanted to ask you about Danielle Smith, specifically what your reaction is to Danielle Smith claiming on a podcast that she asked the U.S. administration officials to pause tariffs because she was concerned it was helping the Liberals.
Yeah, I think it is shameful. If you break down what Danielle Smith is proposing, she's talking about taking steps to harm the Liberals and to prevent tariffs in a political manner to create a political outcome. She should be talking about stopping tariffs to protect Canadians, to just stop them entirely. She shouldn't be saying to do it in a way that benefits one party or another. If you're loyal to this country, if you care about Canadians, you would say, stop the tariffs. Don't hurt Canadian workers. Don't hurt Canadian families. Don't hurt Quebecers. And so to me, it's very shameful what she's doing. She's literally playing games with people's lives. Like, this is not a game. Like, the tariffs aren't a game to win or lose elections. It's about people losing their jobs. Here in Montreal, we already know people have lost their jobs just by the threats of the tariffs. And we know more people are going to lose their jobs when these tariffs start to really take hold. And so this is not a game. This is serious. We got to defend our country, and we got to stand together. We can't afford to have people going off and trying to cut deals that hurt political parties. We should be defending Canadians, defending Quebecers, defending people. And that's what New Democrats are about. We want to fight for you. We want to fight for your family. And in this time when there's so much uncertainty, who do you want in Ottawa fighting for you and your family? Who's only going to be focused on you, not on billionaires, not on CEOs, but you and your family. That's us. That's this amazing team behind me. That's New Democrats.
What, if anything, should the government do in response to what Danielle Smith said on this podcast?
Well, I think we should denounce it and call it out for being shameful. And really the focus, again, has to be doing everything we can to stop these tariffs. We need to also never lose sight of the fact that in any crisis, we've seen this again and again, in any crisis, it's regular folks that end up paying the price. That cannot happen. And we are the only party focused on regular folks. You can see the plans of the other parties. You know, Pierre Poilievre showed up to a factory, literally a factory where workers had been fired because of the tariffs, and his announcement was a tax cut for big business. He said nothing to the workers who had just lost their jobs. Nothing about EI, nothing about helping those workers. And Mark Carney has been the Prime Minister now and found time to go to Europe. He found time to meet with the King. He found time to flip-flop on the capital gains, giving a tax cut to millionaires. But what has he done for a worker who right now knows that if they lose their job, they've got no protection in place? He's done nothing for that worker. And so that's the difference between those guys and me. They have a different approach, but their approach is one where they do whatever it takes to help out the richest, the billionaires, and sadly ignore everyday folks. Our focus is the opposite. We are every day focused on you and your family. We don't care about helping out billionaires. We care about helping you and your family.
Thank you very much. Next question.
Rachel Aiello, CTV News. Beyond forming government, what would tangible success look like for the NDP in this election?
Well, we want to elect more New Democrats because when it comes down to it, and I've seen this very clearly in my time at the federal level, whether it was the pandemic or the recent minority government, I can tell you with so much confidence, people are better off when you elect New Democrats. We fight for you, we stand up for you, and we deliver. Just 25 of us in the pandemic, we're 24 in the pandemic, 25 in the minority government, just 25 and 24 of us, we were able to deliver real concrete help for people that made the difference between people putting food on the table or not during the pandemic. We were able to deliver dental care for millions of Canadians. We were able to deliver pharmacare for millions of people. We were able to do this, and we fought for this. We fought hard for this. So when you elect a New Democrat, wherever you are, wherever you've been, and whoever you voted for before, if you elect a New Democrat, you're gonna get someone that's gonna fight for you. You're gonna get someone that's gonna wake up every single day and say, what can I do to help out everyday folks? Not who's gonna try to help out the billionaires, the millionaires, or the CEOs, or big corporate landlords, but what can I do to help out everyday families in my community? And that's what you need. That's what New Democrats will do for you. So I ask you, in this election, ask yourself, who do you want fighting for you every day in Ottawa? I think the answer is very clear, New Democrats.
And specifically looking at Quebec, you made a deliberate choice to come to Montreal first. Can you speak to why that is and what you think about the current electoral dynamic makes it possible for the NDP to pick up more than the one seat you have right now?
We made it a very clear point. I should probably do this in French too, but we made it a very clear point to choose Montreal on day one of the election. To launch our campaign, we wanted to be in Montreal, we wanted to be in Quebec. A big part of that is I got into politics to make a difference in people's lives. And I was really inspired by Jack Layton. And Jack Layton's dream was that New Democrats are not just the conscience of Parliament, but we actually form government to make people's lives better. We need to be in a position to make decisions that benefit everyday folks. And to continue that dream, we have to win seats in Quebec. We have to win seats in Montreal. And that's why it was so important to me to send that message. We need to win here. We want to win here. We care about the people of Quebec. We fought for you, and we've delivered for you. And we wanted to show that to form government, to continue Jack Layton's dream, we need to win in this city, we need to win in this province, and we're going to do that.
En français, s'il vous plaît. En français, s'il vous plaît.
Oh, oui, je pense qu'il faut.
Yes. So the question was why we decided to launch our campaign on day one here in Quebec. And the answer is that it was very important for me to be in Quebec. I got into politics to change people's lives, to improve people's lives. And I was inspired by Jack Layton. And Jack Layton's dream was that the NDP would not just be the conscience of Parliament, but that we would form a government. Form a government to help people. And in order to do that, we must win in Quebec. We must win seats in Montreal and across Quebec. And I want to continue that dream. It's important to me because I saw the impact that we had in a minority government. I know that you're better served with New Democrat MPs in the House. I know that. In tough times, if you have a New Democrat MP, that person will fight for you, not for CEOs or billionaires, but for you and your family. So I wanted to be here in Quebec today to present our plan on housing. I love Quebec. I love Montrealers, and we need you. So if you voted in the past for another party, well, I need your help. If you want us to continue our work, that we continue the work we've done thus far, we need your help, we need your vote, we need your support to continue that important work. Thank you.
Next media. Hi, Mr. Singh, David Thurton, CBC Radio. After this, we're going to be going to Toronto, taking the bus, not flying. How much sense does it make to be on a bus for 6 hours in a snowstorm when you're this far behind in the polls? How productive is that?
We want to be in Toronto, the next city. It's an important place. I was born in Toronto, got a love for Toronto. We're going to be spending time with Batila Carpoche in downtown Toronto. It's important for us to be there as well. And I want folks to know, wherever you are, whether you're in Toronto, whether you're in Montreal, East Coast, West Coast, North or South, you are better off when you've got a New Democrat fighting for you. I've seen this in the campaign. I've seen this in the minority governments. New Democrats fight for you. We're not out there trying to help a billionaire get richer. We're not trying to help corporate landlords. We're here for you. And so it's going to be very important for us to be in all major parts of the city and to let folks know that if you elect New Democrats, you're going to get a fighter that's in there for you. And we need your support. We need you to stand with us so that we can fight for you and we can take on the big challenges that we're up against.
Just as a follow-up, you've been speaking about Mark Carney and his involvement with Brookfield Investments. You seem to be suggesting that he has done something unethical during his time there. He joined Brookfield in 2020. He rose to the position of chair. Some of what you're alleging happened before he was there. So how fair is it to tie him to all the sins of Brookfield, the alleged sins of Brookfield, if he was only there for a couple of years?
I mean, he was there for a significant part of time, and he was the chair of Brookfield. So, I mean, if he wants to brag about his record, he also has to accept what he did when he was in those positions. It's clear that he's made decisions, and I don't fault him for making lots of money for the super rich, but for me, it's hard, and I ask people to ask this question. It's hard to imagine someone that was a part of a corporate landlord, like a massive corporate landlord in Canada, that profited off of the housing crisis. Like Brookfield engaged in rent evictions. Rent evictions, people in Montreal, people in Toronto, people in Vancouver know all too well what rent evictions are all about. You're in a place that's affordable, you get kicked out, that same apartment gets a new countertop and then goes back on the market for triple the rate. Sure, that makes a lot of money for the corporate landlord, but that contributed to the housing crisis. It profited off of the housing crisis. So I wonder, I mean, how can somebody who made money off the housing crisis be the guy that's going to fix the housing crisis? Like, I don't think that really makes sense. And he's also a part of a company that was found to be one of the biggest tax dodgers in our entire country. Brookfield, as a corporation, was one of the biggest tax avoiders, and he again was a chair of that. So this is his record. And I'm sure, I mean, he's good at making money for big corporations, but what did these corporations do? Rent evicted people, avoided paying taxes. That's not a track record of someone that's going to solve the problems we're up against. When we actually need to find ways to close the loopholes so that these big corporations don't avoid paying their fair share. We need to actually stop big corporations from ripping off people when it comes to their homes. And so I don't think that person that contributed to the problem can actually be a real solution to those problems. He's going to do what he's always done, which is make a lot of money for the super rich and hurt people in the process. And I think that's something that we should be worried about.
I've been listening in to NDP leader Jagmeet Singh as he's speaking in Montreal this hour. Hello and welcome inside the CBC newsroom. I'm Arthi Pohl. It is the first full day of campaigning, a busy one as Canadians head toward a federal election on April 28th. It's being viewed as an election unlike any other, with the country in a trade war and facing threats of annexation. Even before the tariff threat, voters had a host of serious concerns, as we heard, from housing to grocery prices. And as leaders stake out their early policy positions, they are trying to draw sharp contrast to their rivals. We do expect to hear from many party leaders today. We're standing by to bring you the official campaign launch of the Bloc Quebecois and to an event with Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre. But first, we did just hear, as I mentioned, from the NDP leader. He was focusing in on housing, trying to distinguish himself from the other two candidates, saying voters need to ask themselves who's in it for you, suggesting the Liberals and Conservatives are not. Let's bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor. She was listening into this from Ottawa. You know, Singh says he plans to unlock public land and build more affordable housing. We've heard this promise from him before. He's in a unique position. Unlike the two other frontrunners, he has run as the leader before in a federal election and can call on successes.
Yeah, so just in the interest of time, we got a lot to unpack there, and there are a lot of topics, but some things I'd like the audience at home to know, having just sort of heard all of that. This was an announcement about a specific housing proposal on the part of the NDP about how to use federal crown lands in order to increase the availability of rent-controlled homes. In the NDP's plan, they're saying that 100% of the crown lands available for housing should be used for this kind of affordable social housing, and they do not want the government to sell these lands. They want the ownership to be retained, in the public hands, but it to be sort of managed and used for rent-controlled homes. They say if they executed this plan, they could have 100,000 rent-controlled homes by 2035. They're also proposing redesigning and doubling a land for acquisition of other development properties, investing $1 billion over 5 years for more space to build rent-control homes. And with this came an accusation by Jagmeet Singh that the Liberals, quote, did nothing on this front to see more homes built. Now, I can tell you, if you remember the last federal budget, I've been doing some reading here, there's a whole section on the use of existing federal properties to build homes, including a lot of details about using old armories and old government buildings and all these sorts of things to make homes. There's actually a whole website about some 473 hectares so far of former public lands that have been turned into land available for housing. This is a work in progress, not all of it built yet, only just underway kind of in the last year or so. But the difference between the Liberal plan and the NDP plan seems to be that it's more mixed in the Liberal plan. There would be some land sold off, some land set aside for what the Liberals have called affordable housing, but some of it going into the private sector for private development, whereas the NDP plan seems to be all about sort of having rent-controlled units. So that's my best quick estimate of sort of how to differentiate between what the government's been doing, the Liberal government so far, versus the NDP vision. Quickly, though, on the tax cut front, because tax cuts are going to be the story of the day here, we got Jagmeet Singh's reaction to the fact that now we have Conservatives proposing a tax cut for the lowest income bracket. It is kind of 15% right now for the first kind of $55,000 worth of income. They want to drop it to 12.75%. If you're thinking, wow, I bet that costs the federal treasury a lot of money. Indeed, 2 years from now, when it's fully ramped in, the annual cost of that tax cut, $14 billion. And we're going to hear more from Pierre Poilievre on that when we get to his newser, which is lined up on the runway here. But Jagmeet Singh pointing out that whether you're talking about this Conservative cut or the one that Mark Carney let fly yesterday, which was only a 1% decrease from 15 to 14 in that bottom tax bracket. In Democrats' eyes, that is unfair because no matter if you make a little or you make a lot, you're all getting the same amount of money, which for a relatively lower income earner is totally different than a relatively wealthy person. The NDP would like to see help much more targeted and not something that could benefit people who have higher incomes. They want to see the federal assistance focused on people who need it the most. And so that's why we saw that. The other thing I'll just point out, just at the end there where they were talking about the Canada-US stuff, just something else, a bit of a fact check. There was an accusation here from Jagmeet saying that the Liberals have done nothing for workers. I just want to pause here because we have seen a couple of announcements just in the last few weeks here of specific supports available for workers who are hit by layoffs in the face of these tariff threats and tariffs coming in place. Indeed, just last Friday evening, there were more changes to EI in terms of waiting periods and things like that to help people maybe escape people's notice. But there were kind of 11th hour improvements for workers unleashed as recently as 2 days ago, plus an earlier package worth several $1 billion that was laid out by the Liberal government. So the whole did nothing for workers. There were some things. The NDP may find them inadequate, fair enough, but I don't know that did nothing is quite an accurate statement against sort of the announcements that we had to date since this tariff war kicked off.
A lot to go through there. Thanks, Janice. That's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. And as she mentioned, we do want to take you now to Brampton, Ontario, because we know Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is making a campaign announcement. As you can see right there on the podium, he's going to focus on a 15% income tax cut. Let's watch.
Thank you, everyone. I'm delighted to be here at Kruger, particularly to have the opportunity to meet some extraordinary workers. Some people talk about ordinary people, but I find these people are extraordinary people. Extraordinary workers who are building this country. And this is a company that has existed since 1904. Kruger manufactures boxes and containers that allow our goods to be shipped across the country and to foreign markets. And thus, our products go directly to our ports, and there are 300 employees who are capable of getting a good paycheck to support their family. I also want to thank Jeff Hayworth, who has been working for 20 years at Kruger, and he's been the CEO for 12 years. And this is a great experience that he's had here at Kruger. So this is work that we want to reward. We want jobs that reward work, so that anyone, anywhere who works hard to realize their dreams can have a great home in a safe community under a proud flag. And that's the promise of Canada. And my father taught me that. We were young, we didn't have much money, and we went on a camping trip to Penticton in BC. And my father was a very responsible person with money. And I saw some young children who were using jet skis on the lake. And I said to my father, I want you to rent me a jet ski. And he said, we're not going to pay $100 for 1 hour on a jet ski. We can rent you a pedalo, a yellow one. So I went around the lake on that, and the other children with their jet skis came near me and laughed at me because they had a jet ski and I only had a pedalo. So I went back to the tent and I said to my father, I was very sad, and he said, look, we're going to make a deal. You go back to Calgary, you're going to get a job, you're going to save some money, and when you're 16, you can take our minivan, put some gas in it, pay for that, and come here by yourself and rent a camping site on your own and rent your own jet ski. That's the way it works. If you want good things in life, you have to work. And the problem is that in Canada, now people who work very hard and contribute, do not get what they're owed, a good home and a good life. After 10 years After the Liberal lost decade, everything is more expensive. Taxes have gone up, and we're losing jobs, and our country is increasingly dependent on the U.S. So the choice ahead of us in this election is whether the Liberals deserve a fourth term to continue to increase taxes and costs in general, or whether it's time to put Canada first with a new Conservative government that will cut taxes and reward work. The Liberals under Carney and Trudeau doubled everything with taxes and creating more inflation. We saw the worst economic growth in the G7, and we lost $1.5 trillion that was driven to the United States. Canadian families, average Canadian families, spend more on taxes than they spend on groceries, clothing, and housing. That means that you're spending more for the government than you spend for your own family. You're working harder and harder for less and less. And we all remember that the Liberals 10 years ago promised to cut taxes, after which they increased taxes. And now 80% of Canadians in the middle class are paying more taxes than 10 years ago. So if the Liberals come back with new election promises to do exactly the same thing they didn't do for 10 years, we can't believe them. These are the same Liberal MPs, the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal strategists making the same Liberal promises, and we will get the same Liberal results if we give them a fourth mandate. That is why things have to change. It has to change. It has to really change with a government that will put Canadian taxpayers first for a change. And if we elect Mark Carney and the Liberals for a fourth term, they will simply do their work for the multinationals and companies such as his own that moved its headquarters to New York and hides his assets in blind trust. So that's not a solution. He will never fight for everyday Canadians. Enough is enough. Canadians deserve better than that, better than suffering through another 4 years under the Liberals. After everything they've been through, they deserve hope and change. They deserve to be able to have a good paycheck. And that's why I'm announcing today that a new Conservative government will put Canadian taxpayers first by cutting taxes by 15% for average workers. Every Canadian pays taxes, and everyone that pays taxes will save money. For an average worker, it will be almost $1,000 less tax. For a couple, it will be almost $2,000 in their pockets. And this will not only reduce government costs, but it will incentivize people to work and bring back more production to Canada, supporting our small businesses, where Canadians can spend more money. That will strengthen our economy and make us stronger in relation to Donald Trump's threats. That cut is part of the Conservative tax cuts on work, on investment, energy, and construction and housing. That also includes eliminating the GST on new homes to bring down the cost and incentivize construction. election. And unlike the Liberals, who have weakened Canada and made Canada more dependent on the United States, Conservatives will unleash our potential so that Canada can be in a position of strength in the face of Donald Trump. With weak leadership under the Liberals for 10 years, we are weaker now, and taxpayers are poorer. Only a new Conservative government will put Canada first for a change. A new Conservative government will restore the promise of Canada, where whoever works hard can realize their dreams, where people who work hard can have a good home in a safe neighborhood, protected by our proud soldiers under our proud flag. That is the promise of Canada. We will bring that back. That's our goal. That's our mission, to put Canada first for a change. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, everyone. It's great to be here today. I think we're setting off alarm bells here. We're very pleased to be here today with Anna and the kids at Kruger Packaging. I was able to do some measurements and watch the precision of your work, talk to some of the incredible workers a few moments ago. This is a company that's been around for 120 years, and they have 300 employees. Jeff and the team here at Kruger have been building an incredible business that packages up the goods that arrive on our doorsteps. But these people have done everything right, and yet, during the lost Liberal decade, they've been punished for their hard work. Housing costs have doubled. Food prices have risen 37% faster in Canada than they did in the United States during the last 5 years. All taxes now cost families more than they spend on food, clothing, and shelter combined. Work no longer pays. People are punished. You know, it was funny, I saw this meme the other day, and it was a little kid sitting on a park bench next to his dad, and he said, "Dad, what is an income tax form?" And his dad said, "Well, it's kind of like your report card at school, except the opposite. The better you do, the more you get punished." And that is what income tax is. It is the fine you pay for the crime of working hard. These people behind me, they work hard every day. And yet, at the end of the month, they look at their pay stub and it's tax after tax after tax after tax. And the more they work, the more they pay. And we're punishing our workers. No wonder our economy has grown slower than any other G7 country. No wonder $500 billion of investment has left to the United States during the lost Liberal decade of Trudeau-Carney Liberals. Now, the reality is now they're seeking a fourth mandate. Can you imagine putting them in charge a fourth time after they doubled housing costs, doubled debt, doubled the food bank lineups? That would be the worst possible thing we could do for our taxpayers. We remember that 10 years ago, Justin Trudeau promised lower taxes for the middle class. And what happened? 82% of middle-class Canadians ended up with a higher income tax bill on top of their carbon tax bill. Trusting the same Liberal MPs, the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal strategists to make the same Liberal promises that they've been breaking for 10 years will only guarantee that the fourth Liberal mandate will be even worse than the previous three. So the choice in this election is very simple. Do you want a fourth Liberal mandate where they will raise your taxes and drive up your costs? Or do you think it's time to put Canadian taxpayers first for a change with a new Conservative government? And that's why I'm here today. Today I'm announcing that Canada First Conservatives will cut income taxes by 15% for the average worker, or $2,000 for the average couple. This is a tax cut for seniors who are drawing their pension or retirement income. They will pay, on average, 15% less. This is a tax cut for the workers behind me who will pay 15% less on their income tax. This is a tax cut for the waitress, for the welder, for the barber. This is a tax cut for everybody who has ever got up early in the morning and worked hard to build our country. This is a tax cut that will put Canada first. We will do it by reducing the lowest bracket from 15 to 12.75, which is a 2.25% percentage point reduction, and that works out to a 15 percentage reduction in the overall tax bill of everyone earning up to $57,000. That said, because we are cutting the lowest bracket, every single Canadian who pays income tax will pay less. Modest income people will pay less in relative terms and as a share of their overall income. We will ensure that this money goes right into people's pockets so that they can make the decisions. They will then spend that money at local small businesses who will then be able to hire more people, creating even more powerful paychecks on which the taxes will be further still lowered. It is part of an overall plan, what I call the Bring It Home tax cut. It's an across-the-board tax cut on energy, work, investment, and home building. It includes axing the carbon tax, and that includes repealing the carbon tax law, axing the carbon tax for real, for everyone, for everything, for good, for a change. It includes taking the GST off new homes, axing the sales tax on new homes, to lower the cost of buying one and to stimulate more housing construction. It will include lower taxes on investment to bring home the $500 billion that the Liberals have driven away through higher taxes and by blocking our resource projects. We will I call it Bring It Home because we're going to be bringing home our money from abroad, and our workers are going to bring home more of the money that they earned so that it can go to their family and their needs. I was speaking to Debrika earlier on, and she was saying, and she's working very hard, but finding the costs are getting out of control. Her husband has been sick and they've been struggling. And so that it's hard to pay for the bills. And even when she does work harder, she notices that she loses the benefit from her paycheck. We're in this for people like Debrika and her family, the people who've done everything right. They deserve the Canadian promise that hard work gets you a great life in a beautiful house, on a safe street, protected by brave troops, under a proud flag. Canada first. Let's bring it home. Thank you.
Thank you. We will now take questions. Please name and outlet.
Good morning, Mr. Poilievre.
Thank you.
It's Bill Curry from the Globe and Mail. On your announcement today, your party says that this will have a fiscal impact of about $14 billion a year.
Yeah.
So my core question is, it seems like the cost of the things that you've been promising are much larger than the things you've listed so far in terms of what you're going to cut. And you're also saying you're going to shrink the deficit, and economists are saying the deficit is already getting much larger because of tariffs. So how does that all add up?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and it's one that we've been spending a lot of time answering, and you'll see that in our costed platform. Just for some context, you're quite right. After the lost Liberal decade, the national debt has doubled. Government spending is up by 80%. Most of those spending increases happened while Mark Carney was Justin Trudeau's economic advisor. They have ballooned the bureaucracy by adding 110,000 more bureaucrats. They doubled spending on outside consultants. They've blown billions of dollars on handouts to corporate insiders. And finally, they've increased spending on foreign aid that sometimes goes to dictators, terrorists, and multinational bureaucracies that don't help people on the ground. So giving Liberals a fourth term will only drive debt, taxes, and the cost of living higher. What we need is a new Conservative government that will put Canada first for a change. So I'll tell you what we are going to do. We will be cutting bureaucracy, cutting consultants, cutting back on handouts to insiders, and we will cut back on foreign aid to bring our money home to this country. We will also, and those will be spelled out in our platform, with numbers to show how we will reduce the cost of government so that we can leave more money in the pockets of the hardworking Canadians behind me. We'll also bring in a dollar-for-dollar law that will require ministers find $1 of new savings for every dollar of new spending. And that will drive down the cost and drive up the efficiency so that we can get value for money. You'll remember, Bill, because you were around, and I know your nose was deep in the books every day studying the finances in that era. In the Harper government, we cut the GST from 7 to 6 to 5%. We cut income taxes. We brought in special tax breaks for families. We cut small business taxes. We cut taxes on large employers. We cut literally every single tax the government collected, and somehow we managed to balance the budget at the end of it all. How did we do it? We drove efficiencies. We ran a lean operation. We cut out the waste. We were totally intolerant of corruption. And by the way, we unleashed our resource sector, which generated more revenue for the government without charging more taxes on the people. That is how we put Canada first for a change. Thank you. Merci beaucoup, Bill. C'est une
Thank you
question
very
très
much,
importante.
Bill. That's a very important question. Obviously, after the lost Liberal decade, the national debt has doubled at the same time that they increased taxes on the middle class. Most of the debt was added after Mr. Carney became the economic advisor to Justin Trudeau. And now we see the same ministers, the same Liberal MPs and ministers and strategists that are making the same Liberal promises. So we'll get the same Liberal results if we give them a fourth term. What we need is to put Canada first for a change by cutting bureaucracy, cutting consultants, cutting foreign aid, and cutting corporate handouts to government friends rather than creating jobs. And that is the plan we will present. We are on day 2 of the election campaign, so you will see the savings that we intend to make. And as you know, Mr. Curry, because you were a financial expert during the Harper years and you read all the budgets, we were able to cut the GST, cut taxes on businesses and on workers. We cut every tax that the Liberal government brought in, and at the same time we balanced the budget because we showed discipline in reducing the bureaucracy and intolerance for waste. That is the approach we will take to protect Canadians, to strengthen this country. Fewer bureaucrats, more entrepreneurs, fewer consultants, more workers. That's the approach we need to put Canada first for a change.
Next question. Good morning, Mr. Polyev.
Good morning.
Kate McKenna from CBC News.
Yes.
I want to return to what Danielle Smith said to Breitbart News. She said tariff threats have helped the Liberals and that she asked for a pause on the dispute between the two countries to get through the election. She also said that you are more aligned with President Trump's agenda than your Liberal counterparts. I'm wondering if you feel these comments are appropriate.
Are which?
Appropriate.
Well, people are free to make their own comments. I speak for myself, and let's talk about my agenda. My agenda is to put Canada first for a change. You know, there's a reason why Donald Trump wants the weak, out-of-touch Liberals in power. They've handed him control of our economy. Trudeau and Carney raised taxes on work, investment, and small business, driving $500 billion out of our economy to the U.S. They blocked pipelines, mines, LNG plants, forcing our energy companies to sell 100%, almost 100% of their product to the Americans at discount prices. They have buried us in bureaucracy, and Donald Trump knows that a weak, out-of-touch Liberal government, given a fourth mandate, will only make Canada a bigger target for him. What we need, and that's why the choice in this election is whether we're going to elect weak, out of touch Liberals to a fourth mandate, or whether it is time to put Canada first for a change with a new Conservative government that will axe taxes, build homes, unleash our resources, bring home our jobs so that we can confront Donald Trump and the Americans from a position of strength. En français aussi. Donc, la question sur mon agenda.
So the question about my agenda, well, my agenda is to put Canada first. Obviously, Mr. Trump prefers the Liberals because they're weak. And this liberal weakness has allowed President Trump to control our economy with those tariffs. After 10 years of the Liberals, they have weakened the government. They have weakened Canada in relation to the United States. They broke our immigration system, blocked our natural resources, taxed our workers and businesses, drove $500 billion to the U.S. That's exactly the reason why Mr. Trump would like to see the Liberals in office for a fourth term. In addition to that, Mr. Carney moved his headquarters to the U.S. only 6 days after President Trump threatened Canada with tariffs. So do we want to give a fourth term to the Liberals to weaken our country even further? Or do we want a new Conservative government that will put Canada first by cutting taxes, by greenlighting natural resource projects, by freeing up our entrepreneurs to do what they need to do? And that way, Canada will be confronting Trump in a position of strength.
Joe Warmington, Toronto Sun, Post Media.
Hi, Joe.
Nice to see you. I think when I look at the crowd here, and I know some of these people, I see them at the rinks, I see them in the shopping mall.
Good folks.
And I see the families and the children. I think that my feeling from a street columnist is the number one issue is the future for families owning homes, these kinds of things.
Yeah.
This tax cut certainly will help that. But I think when you follow the news and the press releases over the last 10 years, what you see is every day an announcement of money going out. Never any accounting for it. We don't see any results from it. A lot of times it's abroad. You kind of touched on that a little bit. And I want to talk about that, about getting control of the money that the taxpayers are paying here in this country. They hear all the stuff with Donald Trump and all of that, and they're worried. And you hear it every day. I think that, for me, is the number one part of this election, is that issue of the future.
I couldn't agree more. And electing the Liberals to a fourth mandate would not move us into the future. It would bury us deeper in the past, deeper in debt, deeper in taxes, deeper in more and more inflation. The Liberals weakened our economy by blowing cash out the door. They doubled our national debt, much of that debt during good times. In fact, the majority of the new debt they added had nothing to do with COVID. And now we're buried under that debt. They blocked our resource projects, landlocking us into the Americans. They've taxed our people and our businesses sometimes into submission and put us into an unprecedented place of weakness relative to Donald Trump, who now threatens us. And I know that people are scared. They feel threatened. They've lived through hell over the last decade, and now they're facing these unjustified threats from President Trump, who quite frankly needs to knock it off. The only way to make that happen is to reject a fourth Liberal term and elect a new Conservative government that puts Canada first, so that we can cut taxes for our workers, cut waste, bureaucracy, consultants, foreign aid, reduce the cost of government, and unleash our resources in this country so that we can become strong, self-reliant, sovereign, stand on our own 2 feet as we stand up to the Americans with strength.
En français, s'il vous plaît.
Merci beaucoup de votre question.
Thank you very much for your question. You're right. After the lost Liberal decade, We are in a position of weakness in relation to the U.S. They doubled our national debt. Most of that debt was added and had nothing to do with COVID-19. It was just uncontrolled spending that happened when Mr. Carney was the economic advisor to Justin Trudeau. We're talking about the same Liberal MPs, the same Liberal ministers, the same Liberal policies. What we need is a new Conservative government that will put Canada first by cutting bureaucracy, cutting consultants, cutting foreign aid, and cutting little gifts to corporate friends of the government in order to bring down the costs for Canadians and free up our entrepreneurs, allowing them to bring back production to Canada and green-lighting natural resource projects, including LNG Quebec, and that way we can strengthen our economy in relation to the U.S. to confront Trump with strength.
And this will be the last question.
Thank you.
Olivier Bussy from TVA, your line is now open. Please ask your question.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Poilievre. J'espère que vous m'entendez bien.
Hello, Mr. Poilievre.
Mark Carney
has named people to play key roles in his team. Can you tell voters who among your members of parliament have the skills to fill those roles? Well, we have quite a few. I'm not going to name my future cabinet, not today. Obviously, nobody would do that in opposition. It's not responsible to do so. But I can tell you that we have a very experienced team capable of running a government. For example, we have hotel owners, Ryan Williams, and the former Minister of Finance of Nova Scotia. We have an excellent team in Quebec as well, with a number of MPs who are part of my team already. Pierre Paulus, who is a former member of the armed forces and businessman with a great deal of experience. Yves Lévesque, who is probably the best mayor in Canada, who built up Trois-Rivières. So we have a number of members of parliament. We have a former minister from out west. So I'm not going to appoint my cabinet right now. I'm just telling you we have a great team. And that's the choice. Do you want to give a fourth term to the Liberals with the same ministers? Because you know who will be the Liberal ministers. Stephen Guilbeault and other people from the far left that have destroyed our economy and made us weak in relation to the U.S. over a decade. But if you want real change to put Canada first, you must elect a Conservative government that will cut taxes, cut bureaucracy, greenlight natural resource projects, and, in fact, cut taxes by 15% for every worker across the country.
All right. En passant, j'aimerais bien, TVA, j'aimerais bien avoir le débat avec M.
I would like to have that debate with Mr. Carney on his proposal to have an additional Liberal mandate. If he thinks the Liberals should have a fourth term after the lost Liberal decade, he should say yes to the leaders' debate on TVA, and I will bring forward my plan to put Canada first for a change.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm not going to be announcing my cabinet. I just went through a whole list of fantastic candidates that we have on our roster. It will be up to the Canadian people to decide whether they want to bring back the Liberal team, the Liberal MPs, Liberal ministers, Liberal strategists who've been in power for 10 years and give them a fourth consecutive mandate, or whether it is time.
So we have been listening into Conservative Party leader Pierre Poilievre as he is speaking at a packaging plant in Brampton, Ontario. You are watching CBC News Network. I'm Arthi Pol. We're covering multiple announcements from federal party leaders today as we're into the first full day of campaigning ahead of a general election. I do want to mention, because we were just listening to Poilievre speak about debates, we have a little bit of breaking news to bring you here, and that is that, in fact, the Leaders' Debates Commission has confirmed the dates and times for French and English language debates. They will be held respectively on April 16th and 17th at 8 p.m. and 7 p.m. in Montreal again. So that has just been confirmed here. Now, back to what we were just listening into, we know that Poilievre just announced that if elected, the Conservatives will cut the rate of tax on the lowest tax bracket from 15% to 12.75%, which will cut taxes individuals pay by about $900 a year or $1,800 per two-income family. When that measure is fully implemented in 2027-2028, the cut will cost about $14 billion a year. A note for our viewers, we are standing by to take you to a campaign event for Liberal leader Mark Carney. But before that, we want to quickly break down what we just heard. For that, I'll bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor. She's been listening in with me from Ottawa. Poilievre also talked about running a more lean operation, trimming federal government bureaucracy, putting accountability on government spending. Let's quickly break down what we heard.
Yeah, and I just, on the debate front, because folks may not realize in English Canada, there is another debate that in the past has been hosted by the private network TVA in French only, that, for example, in the last election, we saw the leaders participate in. This time, TVA is offering to host another debate, but it's pay to play. The parties have to spend, I believe it's $75,000 to participate. The Bloc has said yes. We just heard Pierre Poilievre saying that the Conservatives are interested in being in that debate. We have not yet heard whether Mark Carney and Jagmeet Singh would be prepared to shell out money to appear and participate in that debate on the private TVA network. So that is different from the ones that you were talking about, done by the sort of official debates commission for this election. So just to help people understand there, because I know it does get confusing with competing debates. Now, on the issue of the tax cuts, this is going to generate a lot of interest. Of course, affordability, an issue that Pierre Poilievre wants to run on, an issue I think Conservatives would prefer to be the ballot question versus some of the other things that Canadians are worried about right now. And putting out the biggest plank first, I think you could argue. They are saying that this is a tax cut that will, result in about a 15% savings for someone that makes the average income in Canada, which they are calculating at about $57,000. Of course, if you make about that much, you don't sort of have hardly any income, if at all, that goes into the upper bracket. This bottom bracket that they're lowering from 15 to 12.75% is kind of where all your income is taxed if you are sort of at that level. A lot of Canadians pay no tax at all, if you're wondering why that average might seem a little low. So for those folks, they're saying this will be an average of $900 in savings. But important to understand, this isn't just a straight up check you get for $900. The exact amount would depend, of course, on your actual sort of income. So we're in a game of sort of offering averages and estimates here. This is something that would be ramped in according to their backgrounder, not available completely in this fiscal year, but by 2027, 2028 would be kind of fully implemented. So a fairly short ramp over 2 years. And then that price tag, $14 billion. Now, from a Conservative Party that has vowed that for any additional spending it does, it's going to find equivalent cuts. You heard that question from the Globe and Mail about whether this is really going to add up. Poilievre's explanation is that if they cut consultants, bureaucracy, foreign aid, and the money that the Liberals have been giving to their friends, they can find that much money. I think there's going to be a lot of people pulling out calculators to take a look at whether we really are spending that much money on foreign aid, for example. But also making a claim that under the Liberals, spending has been up 80%. Therefore, we should be able to find all these spending cuts. One of the reasons spending has gone up, though, if you look at sort of under the Harper government, the percentage of sort of spending that was on military, for example, when it dropped so low as a share of GDP versus the universe we're in now, where your military spending needs to go up, according to what your allies want. It really is kind of an apples and oranges comparison on that front in terms of kind of recent investments and frankly the much greater investments to come on that front. So just a few cautions as people are rolling this around in your brain and evaluating these competing offers. The other thing, just quickly, on the question about Danielle Smith and her statement on a right-wing podcast taped a couple weeks ago, apparently, but only just aired and came to light over this weekend, seeming to encourage the Americans to sort of make tariff decisions according to kind of how it would help or not help people in this election in Canada. He was asked specifically if those comments were appropriate. Poilievre's response is that Danielle Smith is free to make her own comments, and then he pivoted and went off on a statement about who was weak and who was strong vis-a-vis the U.S. That is a sharply contrasting point of view to what we heard from NDP leader Jagmeet Singh, who said that what Danielle Smith said was, quote, very shameful, and that this isn't a game when people are losing their jobs, and condemned it straight up. So a very contrasting approach between the NDP leader and the Conservative leader in terms of sort of their personal reaction and assessment of what the Alberta Premier said. So, you know, already we're seeing a lot of contrast in this election.
Thank you for this, Janice. That's CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. Now, as promised, we also want to take you to another event in Gander, Newfoundland now. Liberal leader Mark Carney is speaking with reporters at a campaign stop there. One of the issues that he's focusing in on is which leader would be best to take on the U.S. president. Let's listen in.
I would like to thank everyone for welcoming me to Gander. And it's a tradition here because on a day a little over 23 years ago, when the world was ruptured, this town welcomed the world. On September 11, 2001, the United States, Canada, the globe was shaken to the core. Celebrated American landmarks were destroyed. Air travelers were stranded and shocked. Almost 3,000 innocent civilians, including 24 Canadians, were taken from us far too soon. Pourtant, à travers toute l'horreur de cette journée,
and yet, in spite of the horror of that day, people came forward and showed their humanity. In New York and Arlington, courageous firefighters braved the danger to save people. In the air, people made sacrifices to save other people's lives. And here in Gander, as the U.S. airspace was closing, the doors of homes here in Gander began opening.
To over 10,000 people. And over the course of that day, the people of Gander welcomed more than 38 flights. 68 flights, yeah, that's what I was just saying. It says 38, it's 68. Yeah, exactly, and 6,000 passengers, and Pat helped call them in on that day. Overnight, in effect, the town's population almost doubled. You didn't say no. You didn't complain that you didn't have the resources to help. You showed friendship to people who were fearful, and in crisis, you showed character. When people needed help, you gave it, no questions asked, no expectations attached. It was the right thing to do, the Canadian thing to do, and you did it, and you made us proud. The story of that day soon became legend, immortalized in the Canadian-made Broadway hit musical, Come From Away. And it became yet another example of the unbreakable bond between the Canadian and American people. Because when Americans are in need, Canadians have always shown up. Whether during the Iranian hostage crisis, or a few months ago with the California wildfires, or in Afghanistan, where we lost 158 Canadian Armed Forces members and 7 civilians. We showed up. Canada showed up for America. And that was not just in times of calm when it's easy, but in times of crisis when it's hard. Not just when it's convenient, but when it's necessary. We've always been by American side. Non seulement quand c'est calme,
not only when things are calm, not only in crises, not only when it's easy, but at the most difficult times, not only when it's practical, but also when it's necessary. We have always been there for Americans.
Canada and the United States are like brothers. And I know something about having brothers. I have two. We don't always see eye to eye, but when push comes to shove, we're there for each other. Over countless decades, we found a way in true Canadian fashion to disagree agreeably, to choose diplomacy over demagoguery, to put our shared values over our selfish desires. Why? Well, as President Reagan said in Quebec City almost 40 years ago to this day, and I quote, "We're more than friends and neighbors and allies, we are kin, who have together built the most productive relationship between any two countries in the world." But that's changed. And it wasn't us that did the changing. Unfortunately, President Trump's actions have put that kinship under greater strain today than at any time in our storied history. Ces tarifs, ce qu'on bâtit, ce qu'on vend.
These tariffs threaten everything we need, even putting food on our table. This is an attack on our economy, on our sovereignty, and on our way of life.
President Trump wants to break us so America can own us. And we will not let that happen. Now, we are over the shock of the betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons. We have to look out for ourselves, and we have to look out for each other, just like you did in Gander all those years ago. And that's what my government is doing during this crisis. We're acting to protect workers by using every dollar that we collect from retaliatory tariffs to go to workers. I announced that earlier this week. Because we're stronger when we're together. Because we're all in this together, healthcare in Canada is a right, not a big business. Because we're all in this together, our government created $10 a day childcare for hardworking families. I had the honor of meeting with Beulah and Diane earlier, Beulah Cooper and Diane Davis earlier, and Diane pointed out how her family and her grandson benefit from that. In fact, the average family in this great province saves about $6,000 because of that program. Because we're all in this together, we created the Canadian Dental Care Plan. Over 3 million Canadians have already signed up. Over 1.8 million Canadians have already been treated. The first patient treated right here in Gander by Dr. Pat Redmond. This past Friday, we expanded coverage of that program to over 5 million more Canadians who need it. We're acting by putting more money in Canadians' pockets through a middle-class tax cut that I announced yesterday, a tax cut that will save a two-income family up to $825 a year. We can't afford to let anyone, not American politicians or Canadian politicians, make us angry or divided. As Diane said to me earlier, we can't let them change us. They need to be more like us. President Trump's plan is to divide and conquer. Pierre Poilievre's plan is to divide and be conquered. And his negative slogans aren't solutions. His anger isn't action. His division isn't strength. We know that negativity won't win a trade war. Negativity won't pay the rent or the mortgage. Negativity won't bring down the price of groceries. Negativity won't make Canada strong. Nous avons vu où la négativité
We
et la
saw
division
where
ont mené les
negativity and division have led to in the United States.
Quand nous sommes
We
unis.
are stronger when we are united.
Les Américains, ils vont s'affaiblir parce
Americans
qu'ils
will
ne
become
sont
weaker.
Alors, unissons-nous.
So let us unite in this difficult period.
We can see where this leads. America is divided, and that is making them weaker. But as we remember here in Gander, that's not our nature. There's a great line from Come From Away when the mayor, Claude, says, "Tonight we honor what was lost, but we also commemorate what was found." In this crisis caused by the U.S. president and those who are enabling him, we lament a friendship lost, or at least a friendship strained. But we celebrate the Canadian strength we have reclaimed. And while in Gander, Canadians did extraordinary things for Americans when they needed it, now we need to do extraordinary things for ourselves. We will have to do things that we haven't imagined before at speeds we didn't think possible. And that means building millions of homes, building Canada into an energy superpower, building new trade corridors with reliable trading partners. It means a government spending less so Canada can invest more. It means making big polluters pay instead of hardworking Canadians, and creating one Canadian economy instead of 13. Yet, my opponent, Pierre Poilievre, doesn't get this. He doesn't understand what's needed in a crisis. He doesn't understand that leaderships Canadians want in their time of need. In fact, his language sounds a bit familiar. As Daniel Smith has said, Pierre Poilievre is in sync with Donald Trump. Au cours des derniers mois, les Canadiens et
In
les
recent
Canadiennes
months,
se sont unis
Canadians
comme
have come
jamais
autogether
auparavant
as never before,
et se sont ralliés à
and
ce qui
they have
nous
rallied
définit.
around what defines
Notre
us,
magnifique drapeau à feu
our
d'arabe,
magnificent
notre politesse, mais
flag,
notre esprit combatif,
our politeness, but our
et
combative
notre
spirit,
grande fierté d'être
and
les meilleurs
our
au monde
great
dans ce-
pride
dans le sport.
of
Comme
being
hockey et
the best in the
évidemment
world
le
in
football
hockey
après, le
and
match hier soir.
maybe football as well after last
Bien
night's
que tout
match.
cela me rende fier d'être Canadien,
All of this makes me proud to be
rien
Canadian.
ne nous définit mieux que ce que
And that
la
defines
ville de
us
Gander
better,
a fait, sans qu'on
particularly
le lui demande.
as was
Pour les
demonstrated
États-Unis et
by
pour le monde
Gander.
entier.
What Gander
Il y a
did
toutes ces
for the
années.
United States and for the
What Gander
entire
did when
world
the world was
years ago.
shaken is the country we know and love. It's the country that's given me everything, my family, my education, my values. It's the country that I'm fighting for each and every day. And if you give the Liberal Party your vote, it's the country I will fight for the next 4 years as your Prime Minister. It's the country that together we will build Canada strong. Thank you. Merci.
Prime Minister. We'll now begin the question period. We'll take 20 minutes of questions with a couple minutes for local media at the very end. Première question, first question.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur Carney.
Bonjour.
Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Vous avez annoncé
Radio
des nouvelles
Canada,
dépenses.
you announced two new spending and tax cuts. I know that you want to make the public service more efficient, but some people say that won't be enough to balance the budget. Where will you need to cut, Mr. Carney? Thank you for your question. First of all, I think it's important to change the nature of government. Could I just answer you? I have a great deal of experience with the Department of Finance, and the problem arises with spending programs that do not focus on results, and that has to change. We have to change the way we are governed. What I want to know is what your plan is when it comes to tax cuts or cuts in general. Well, my plan is to change the pace of growth of government spending. Over the last 10 years, the pace of growth has been about 9% every year. So we have to reduce that, and focus on results. We have to integrate technology in government and conduct a review of spending programs, not transfers to the provinces, not transfers to individuals, not programs such as childcare or pharmacare and so forth. But just give me an idea of what can be cut. No, we're talking about a complete change in the way government is managed. What about cuts? Well, there will be increased productivity, and that's different. It's different. Will you have a costed platform? Yes, yes. Not like the Conservatives. But I think we need to reflect on the impact of the changes and proposals of the Conservative Party. Mr. Poilievre said dollar for dollar in terms of spending on every initiative.
Less spending.
En anglais? Okay. Look, the exchange, to summarize it, was three things. One is it's changing the speed with which spending grows. It has been growing at 9% per annum. You slow the rate of spending growth. The needs of the country grow, the economy grows, you slow the rate of the spending grows. That changes the fiscal arithmetic. Trust me, I've been in the center of these things over the years. Secondly, how do you do that? You improve the productivity by focusing on results, by integrating technology, by reviewing programs to make sure that they are best value for money and having that impact. You do not, and we're absolutely clear, we are not changing the transfers to the provinces. We are not changing transfers to individuals. We are proud, and this is a huge difference between us and the Conservatives, we are proud of the programs that we have put in place. $10 a day childcare, I just referenced it and the importance in this province. Dental care, millions of Canadians already accessing it. Pierre Poilievre pretends that nobody's ever done. He doesn't see these people. He doesn't care about these people. We're proud of the l'assurance médicale, pharmacare that's put in place. So all of that stays. Now, if you look at what the Conservatives say, dollar for dollar cut, dollar for dollar cut. So if you take their tax announcement today, and you take what Mr. Poilievre has said, no more childcare, no more pharmacare, no more dental care, and even by cutting all of those programs, which he has committed to cut, he can't pay for what he announced today. It's a different view of the world. Our view is we're all in this together. It's the spirit of Gander applied to Canada. His view is it's everyone for themselves. It's the spirit of Donald Trump that he's trying to apply to Canada.
Good morning, sir. Ryan Tumulty, Toronto Star. Mr. Poilievre and you both unveiled middle-class tax cuts yesterday. He described income tax as the fine you need to pay for working hard. His tax cut is larger than yours. I'm wondering what you make of it, if you considered it a deeper cut than the one you offered yesterday.
I think, so thanks for the question. It's a fundamental difference in our approach. We have a balanced approach. He has a simple approach. I recall that Mr. Poilievre, when COVID began, his solution was, let's have a tax cut. His response with the tariff war and the revenue that the government is collecting from the retaliatory tariffs, he said, I'm going to use that to cut taxes. We say we're going to use that to protect workers who are directly affected by, and that's what we've done. That's what we've done with the changes we announced over last week. He said, and now he's acted up with an initiative, that he will eliminate, not just cut, eliminate childcare, eliminate dental care, eliminate pharmacare. He still doesn't have enough to pay. He's going to eliminate foreign aid while he's at it. He's eliminating the Housing Accelerating Fund. So he's eliminating affordable housing. And even with all that, he's getting this number. It's a everyone for themselves approach versus we're all in it together. We have a balanced approach. Yes, we're focused on affordability. Yes, we want Canadians to have more money in their pockets. That's why we have a middle-class tax cut. But at the same time, we have these supports for the most vulnerable in our society, for those who can't afford dental care. We're talking millions and millions of Canadians in that case, millions and millions of Canadians using childcare, so that both parents can go to work and be full parts of society. I can go on, but I'm going to give you your follow-up.
During the Liberal leadership race, you said that your middle-class tax cut would offset the loss of carbon rebates. The cut you offered is up to $825. The rebates were as high as $1,800 for a family in Alberta. I'm just wondering how you square that math.
We do square the math. We have squared the math. A couple of things. One is you look at where the rebate is today, you net the, well, I'm going to look at the camera because you moved behind it, but I can't look you in the eye. But you square it with the carbon price, carbon tax, so-called, that people are no longer paying, because the rebate is obviously a gross amount. You have to net off the carbon tax that's being paid. So you have our tax cut today versus that rebate and the net of the carbon tax that has gone away, plus we have added the rebate, an extra quarter of the rebate that goes directly to people without the carbon tax. So for a median income, a family of earning $50,000, they come out ahead. And by the way, not something that Pierre Poilievre ever mentioned when he said axe the tax for 3 years. Never mentioned the rebate, didn't acknowledge the rebate. Doesn't care about that affordability. Sorry, sir.
Hi, Steve Chase, Globe and Mail. Good morning. You say you're in talks with the Ethics Commissioner to set up a conflict of interest screen. Why not just sell your Brookfield shares and get rid of your unexercised options to avoid having to recuse yourself?
A couple of things. Thanks for the question, Steve. I've more than complied with all the rules, and I've more than complied with all the rules in advance, well in advance, months and months in advance of the requirements that were set up and that currently operate. By the way, requirements that Mr. Poilievre voted for when he was part of Mr. Harper's government. That's the first thing. The second is that I have divested all my assets, with the exception of cash and personal real estate, a house and a cottage, into the blind trust, as is the route. It's a blind trust. I can't, what that means for those who don't follow this, I have no control over it anymore. It's a blind trust. I have no control. I cannot divest anything from it. I can't change that. The trustee manages it accordingly. I have set up screens for Brookfield and a company called Stripe that I used to be on the board of. I've set those screens up already well in advance. They'll be administered by the clerk of the Privy Council and the Chief of Staff. And as well, I have already filed months and months and months and months in advance with the Ethics Commissioner all the detail of when the divestitures happen, all the details of those assets. So again, I've complied with all the aspects. I've over-complied, in fact, well in advance, and this is the system we have, and I'm proud that we have it because it draws a sharp contrast with what other countries have. Sorry, Steve. Back to you.
As far as we know, you've not spoken to Donald Trump since you took office. No. What effort precisely have you made to speak with him? And what is your government doing precisely to prepare for the April 2nd tariffs?
So with respect to the President is waiting for the outcome of the election and see who has a strong mandate from Canadians, or who has a mandate from Canadians. Is it someone who is, to quote Daniel Smith, who's in sync with him? Or is it someone who's going to stand up for Canadians? I'm going to stand up for Canadians. I hope Canadians will back me, and then we'll have a discussion on the basis of as follows, and I'll come to you a second part of your question in a moment. On the basis of the following. First, respect for our country as a sovereign nation. You would think, you would expect, given what these people have done and the long history, you would think respect and friendship for Canada. I'm just looking for respect at this point, acknowledgement of our sovereign nation. Secondly, given the scale of the U.S. trade actions against steel and aluminum, which is absolutely against the terms of CUSMA, given the series of other actions and the prospective actions on the 2nd of April. We need to have a comprehensive discussion with the Americans on the broader economic and, I would say, security partnership as well. So we wait for that. In terms of preparations, we have done the following. We have identified a list of goods and services, but mainly goods, 155 billion of which 30 have tariffs on. So there's an additional 125 that we could put retaliatory tariffs on, depending on what the Americans do, first thing. Secondly, we have put in place those protections for workers through a series of changes to the EI, including some that were announced on Friday, so that there's no waiting period, there's no severance period. You can have job sharing, all these aspects to provide. And those will be paid for by the tariff revenues, or we won't need all of them, but some of them through the tariff revenue. Again, Pierre Poilievre, simple solution, take the tariff revenues, pocket it, have a tax cut. Third thing we've done is we have put in place major supports for our largest companies and our smaller companies, smaller ones through BDC, EDC, farm credit as well, but liquidity support and ability to change the timing of tax payments for companies as well, all of which will supply financial support if necessary in the face of that. So we've done a number of things. I can go on, but I know we've got a lineup here. We've done a number of things to put us in a strong position. See, this is a fundamental mistake that the Americans are making. They think they will weaken us. They think that they can own us, quite frankly. That's what they think. We are going to get stronger. We're going to wait this out. They're going to come to the table, and we're going to negotiate a good deal for the Canadians. Thank you, Steve.
Sir, did you say that President Trump is waiting to talk to the Prime Minister of whoever wins this election?
Well, that's an interpretation, but I think it's a reasonable interpretation. I'm available for a call, but, you know, we're going to talk on our terms as a sovereign country, not as what he pretends we are, and on a comprehensive deal.
En français sur l'appel avec M. Trump.
C'est l'appel. On a du temps? OK. En ce qui concerne, il faut avoir une discussion compréhensive.
I think there needs to be a comprehensive discussion with President Trump.
Il faut qu'il nous donne du respect.
He has to show us respect as a sovereign country.
Ça suffit pour Mr. Trump. Il y a un autre aspect, plusieurs d'autres aspects.
That's enough for Mr. Trump, but there's another aspect to my answer. La presse canadienne. You continue to be questioned about your assets and a potential conflict of interest. The Conservatives continue to attack you on this. Could this be a source of distraction for your campaign? And what can you do to ensure that isn't going to happen? Maybe you could do even more? Thank you for your question. I've already done more. And more quickly than was necessary. I already have established a blind trust, and I did that 6 months in advance. I have already disposed of all my assets. I have only kept a house and a cottage and money. That's it. Everything else has not disappeared, but everything else is in a blind trust. I have already established a screen for Brookfield. I've done that. And this is not a surprise. Obviously, the Conservative Party and the Conservatives don't have many ideas. Their idea is to cut taxes and to cut programs. And that's it. And they like slogans. That's all. On another subject, Is there a risk by moving to the right that will be considered too much to the right for certain progressive liberals or even NDP voters who might be discouraged from voting for you? How do you ensure there's a proper balance there? Thank you for that question. I think it's important that we have a strong economy. That is necessary for our negotiations with the United States, but it's also necessary to have programs like health care, pharmacare, child care, and the entire social safety net we have in Canada. I'm a liberal, and for liberals, we need both. You have to have a strong economy, and we have a plan, and we're taking initiatives to ensure we have a strong Canada and a strong economy. At the same time, we must protect the most vulnerable in society. So you would say you're center-right? No, center-center. Hello, Mr. Carney, Radio-Canada. The Conservative leader is challenging you to participate in the TVA debate. Will you do that? Why not? Why not? Yes. There will be leaders' debates with all the leaders, because if it's TVA, well, for all debates, all the leaders have to be present. So Mr. Singh, Mr. Blanchet, Ms. May, and Mr. Poilievre, and myself, yes. Earlier to my colleague, you said that right now, spending is growing by 9% a year. What would you like to set the level of spending at? Well, thank you for your question, but it's a bit too simplistic. There's the rate of growth of the economy that comes into play. Fiscal management is not as simple as that, like 1% more or less.
Local questions?
Bonjour. Patrick Porter, Radio-Canada Acadie.
Radio-Canada Acadie. In 2019, the Liberal Party's platform promised to move forward with infrastructure projects, and there's a lot of talk about that now. And there was discussion of a tunnel between Labrador and Newfoundland. Mr. Champagne was saying to the provinces recently, please suggest national interest projects that we can build. Will that kind of tunnel be built? Could it be built? Well, I wasn't there in 2019, but I was there last Friday with all the premiers of the provinces and territories, and we had a good discussion about national interest projects, and the federal government, or we are now making major changes as to how we can support those projects of national interest. No one mentioned the tunnel at the meeting on Friday, but we will see. I think we have to work together. That's one of my messages. We must work together, the provinces and the federal government, the indigenous peoples, and we need to move forward with major projects. There are quite a few we could consider, but as I said, no one mentioned that one in particular. There were some fish harvesters yesterday who are frustrated yesterday. Now, are you concerned about the Conservative presence in Newfoundland? Is that a source of worry for you? No, not at all, not at all. It is perfectly appropriate for people to be able to express their frustration with the current situation. And an important message in this context is that the Department of Fisheries and Oceans is closer to the fish harvesters.
The second question. Look, it's entirely right that the harvesters were there yesterday. The Minister of Fisheries met with some of their representatives last evening. I understand their frustrations. Given the situation in the water. Of course, they want a sustainable fishery, sustainable livelihoods, we're listening to their concerns. And what it underscores for me is, as I said last evening, the importance of the Department of Fisheries and Oceans being closer to the wharf. It's something that I had already asked the Minister of Fisheries to look at as a potential structural change in the department. We did a lot in 9 days since I was sworn in, but those structural changes take longer, and if we're re-elected, we will be looking at that very closely. Thank you.
Hi, Troy Turner, local CBC. Of course, fishery is the lifeblood of rural Newfoundland, and the population of rural parts of this province, as I'm sure the rest of the country, are decreasing dramatically. What can be done, I guess, in terms of policy to give these people, I guess, a viability into the future and hope that their communities won't die?
Well, I think there's a lot that needs to be done, okay? That's the first thing. So there's no one silver bullet. Part of the minimum is ensuring that the social services, the supports are there for these communities as well as they are developed in our cities, so that, for example, both parents can go to work, so there's access to childcare, so there's access to the health care that people deserve, all aspects of that health care. And then there's a fundamental issue, there's two sets of issues. There's issues around the lifeblood of these communities, as you just said, so a sustainable fishery. There are rural communities, your question referenced across the country, so sustainable farming and agricultural policies, including for supply management. And then as well, what are we doing? That's the question for us, and we'll be clear on this. What are we doing as our economy is changing to ensure that those changes benefit the rural economy? So one of the biggest changes over the next 10 years, it's not clear to me how much in a debate, TVA or wherever, this is going to come up, but how are we harnessing as a country, all parts of this country, and very much including the outports and rural Canada, harnessing artificial intelligence and what that brings to the benefit of people. And in order to do that, you can't just cut taxes and expect everything to happen. You have to work with the provinces and others to train people, bring them up, and move forward. Thank you.
This puts an end to our press conference. C'est ce qui met fin à la conférence de presse. Thank you.
Can I take the one last question there? If I take the one last, just the look on your face made me.
We've been listening in to Liberal leader Mark Carney as he's speaking in Gander, Newfoundland. Now, Carney is focusing in on Canada's relationship with the United States and how it has transformed recently. Carney is positioning himself as the strongest leader to take on threats from the U.S. president on tariffs and on sovereignty. Now, on the campaign trail already, Carney has also announced a promised tax cut to the lowest income tax bracket that would amount to about $800 a year for a dual income family. Now, in his statement today, he was leaning into really that wave of patriotism we're seeing across this country as it contends with that U.S. trade war. I want to bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor. A few things to sort of pick apart here, and we know that he did say in terms of speaking with the U.S. president that it hasn't happened yet. He's open to a conversation. It would have to be on the terms of a sovereign country. Also, a response to that TVA debate, which you rightfully distinguished from the official debate on April 16th and 17th. The TVA debate would need a $75,000 buy-in, and we heard Carney address that too.
Yeah, he said he's in. I think, if I understood correctly, I sort of have both translation and French in my ear here, but that's the face-à-face debate, not sort of widely watched in English Canada, but a very big deal for viewers of French television in the province of Quebec. So I guess they're getting close to maybe a full roster, but the TVA network said to the parties, look, we'll host it, but you're going to have to pay for it. So, you know, they're making them sort of pay $75,000 per party. And I guess sort of it goes ahead if everyone agrees to kick in on a pay-to-play basis. So the Liberals on board for that. Let's go back to the Canada-US stuff. His theme in Gander very much about this relationship, about the betrayal of the close ties between Canada and the US. Carney earlier today did a photo op where he was sitting down with some of the folks that, you know, we hear about if you've seen Come From Away on Broadway or when it was going through your city across Canada, the story of how Gander opened its homes, literally its community centers, to air travelers who were stranded on 9/11. This is a symbol, and the Americans, you know, in the years since have done a number of things to say thank you to the generosity of that community. Carney using that as a contrast point with the tensions today. As you say, some additional language there about when we might have a phone call or a meeting with Trump. I took Carney to be putting some markers down there and suggesting that this might be a situation where that kind of top-to-top communication, in his words, waits this out to see who actually has a mandate now that they're into an election campaign. I thought that was interesting. Also, just on the tariffs, he said something that I think might be a bit confusing and require clarification, because he was talking about the first tariffs of $30 billion on worth of U.S. goods being in place now, and them having another list potentially in reserve for April 2nd of $125 billion. He didn't mention, though, something else that happened on March 12th when the steel and aluminum tariffs came in. There was another wave of close to $30 billion worth of tariffs on U.S. goods that came in at that point. And I think that means that what's left to be applied as of April 2nd is just $95 billion. I think maybe he just missed speaking about that, but we need to confirm that. On the personal income tax, just on the support, Carney here making it clear that all the revenue raised from those tariffs, because remember it's Canadians that pay those tariffs, not the Americans, all of it will be going back to workers, he said, and referenced some additional supports that were rolled out. I know it was late on a Friday, people might have missed it, but now that we're in election, we're arguing about whether there's been enough support for workers. That came from the NDP leader today. Carney here reminding us of what they had laid out in some detail. On the tax cuts, Carney framing his as something they are doing to make people whole as they lose the carbon rebate, as they will after the final checks pay out in a few weeks' time. You heard Carney here saying that when Pierre Poilievre was talking about the carbon tax, he would never acknowledge the rebate that people were getting back. And indeed, the way Carney is going to make up for it, this 1% drop in the tax rate applying to the lowest bracket of income tax payers isn't going to fully kind of make everyone whole. If you don't pay any tax at all, you are going to come off worse off once you lose your carbon rebate, for example, because that paid out per capita. If you had a lot of kids, you made more under the carbon rebate, whereas your income taxes are just based on your personal income. The other thing, too, there was a section from Carney here where he was talking about how Pierre Poilievre has promised that anything that he spends on, dollar for dollar, he will find space in the budget elsewhere. Carney was laying out sort of the various things that he would maintain no matter what in terms of recent investments in the social safety net, pharmacare, dental care, the child care benefit, in the child care program spending, and so on, and saying that the amount of money Pierre Poilievre is going to have to find is greater than all those programs combined, kind of suggesting that Poilievre's intention here is to put these things at risk and cut them, whereas Liberals intend to maintain the supports available to individuals, maintain the transfers to provinces now, trying to cast doubt on the Conservatives whether those things would really be intact as they seek to find fiscal room for tax cuts. So we've been talking all morning about contrast plays, contrasting vision. You know, I think from Carney here, we had a real kind of differentiation, even as they are both lowering by different amounts, the sort of bottom rate that applies to the lowest income tax bracket. The ability to pay for it, when you're doing a bigger tax cut, you need to find more room to pay for it. Carney suggesting that Poilievre is not going to be able to do that without making some pretty dramatic cuts. Poilievre, just to remind people, suggested he could do this just by canceling contracts, canceling foreign aid, eliminating government waste, without seeing sort of exactly what he's talking about, what contracts he's going to cut. Not clear that math works out, but we've got, 35 days to keep drilling down on this math. And I think it's going to make for a lively debate indeed.
No kidding. Okay, thanks for this. That's the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa. We mentioned that it is a busy day on the campaign trail. We do want to take you now to Quebec City. The Bloc Quebecois leader launched his election campaign today, and he took some questions. Here is Yves-François Blanchet.
The main two political parties competing to form government are offering tax cuts in these early days of the election campaign. How do you compete with that as the Bloc Quebecois?
I don't have to compete with that, but let me say something. How the hell do you intend to do that? One of the parties says we will cut the expenses. Okay, is it the right time to cut the expenses when the moment is more appropriate to support enterprise companies and jobs? And the other party says we will cut expenses and we will cut taxes. There's no way on earth one can manage that. You have to get more income to spend more. And if you do only cut and cut and cut, you will have to tell us where you will make those cuts. So it seems like instead of Mr. Carney convincing Mr. Poilievre to have a program, Mr. Poilievre has convinced Mr. Carney to have only slogans.
And while we're on the subject of numbers, is sending 40 Bloc Quebecois MPs to Parliament an attainable goal for you in this election?
It does not belong to me. I believe you asked me the same question 3.5 years ago, and I had a very bad idea of answering this question. I will not. The Quebecers will decide, but I will tell them something. If you have the slightest doubt about the relevancy of what the Liberals or the Conservatives tell you, you know what to do. You know that there are some MPs that will always fight for you and only for you. And if at the end of the day, we end up with the balance of power, Quebec is safer than it could be in any other scenario.
Okay, so we were listening in there to Bloc Quebecois leader Yves-François Blanchet as he was launching his campaign in Quebec City, the first full day of campaigning for federal party leaders. In the past 2 hours, we have heard from the NDP leader, the Conservative Party leader, the Liberal leader, and then we just also heard from the Bloc Quebecois leader. Of course, many of them focusing in on the economy. We heard from the NDP about housing as well. That said, we are standing by to also take you live to Ottawa because moments from now, government officials will provide a briefing on efforts to protect the integrity of the federal election. This follows the lengthy public inquiry into foreign interference. We will carry that news conference for you and bring you all of the details. That's coming up right here on CBC News Network. Hello and welcome inside the CBC Newsroom. I'm Arthi Pole. It is the first full day of campaigning in the federal election as we head towards April 28th, the date where Canadians will head to the polls. We have heard from many of the major party leaders already today, and we'll bring you the latest from the campaign trail in just a moment. We are also standing by to take you live to Ottawa this hour because any moment government officials will hold a news conference on efforts to protect the integrity of the federal election. Again, as for what we've heard from the party leaders on this busy first full day of election campaigning, there have been promises on taxes, housing, and our relationship with the United States. So for more on what we've heard just in the past few hours, let's bring in the CBC's Janice McGregor in Ottawa, who's been listening along with me this morning. So let's sort of start off with what seems to be top of mind: tax cuts.
Yeah, the game's afoot as to whether the ballot question in this election is going to be about affordability, tax cuts, or whether it's going to be about the relationship with Donald Trump. And we saw, even just comparing the Conservative and the Liberal campaigns today, two pitches to sort of take a dramatically different approach in terms of what they want voters to know. But the Conservatives out first. They're the ones with the tax cut, putting a big one on the table. I'm just watching. This news conference is going to get underway here. But just quickly, the offer from the Conservatives, they are changing the rates that would apply to the lowest income bracket, lowering it from 15% down to 12.75%. That's a significant tax cut, but one that comes with a $14 billion price tag. And as this goes along in this campaign, the question of how they're going to find room to pay for that, I think, is already going to be a matter of debate. It's something that Liberal leader Mark Carney was questioning already this far in. The Liberals are offering also a tax cut to the kind of bottom bracket, but a much smaller one, and doing that with the intention of offsetting the end of the carbon rebates that Canadians have been receiving. The last one is going to be in a couple of weeks. So already the tax cut debate underway, but I want to cede space here for this news conference because as someone who covered the foreign interference inquiry, the security of this vote, the integrity of the process that picks who's going to represent us in Parliament is so critically important. And you're about to hear from some very heavy hitters with our intelligence and security agencies talking about how they intend to safeguard this exercise in democracy, pretty fundamental stuff and something that is definitely of prime concern to us.
Okay, thanks for that, Janice. And we do want to take our viewers now live to Ottawa because representatives from the Government of Canada, as we just heard, are giving an update on measures to protect the upcoming general election. Let's listen in.
Government and democratic institutions at the Privy Council Office. Vanessa Lloyd, Deputy Director of Operations at the Canadian Security Intelligence Service and Chair of the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force. Bridget Walsh, Associate Head, Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, part of the Communications Security Establishment Canada. And Larissa Galadza, Director General, Cyber, Critical Technology and Democratic Resilience Bureau at Global Affairs Canada.
Joining us virtually, we have Greg O'Hayan, Director General of Federal Policing Security Intelligence, RCMP, and Anand Alvi, Executive Lead, Operations Directorate, Canadian Security Intelligence Service.
I would like to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people.
As some of you are joining us virtually, each of us is on land that has been inhabited by Indigenous peoples since time immemorial.
I invite you to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the lands you call home. Yesterday marked the beginning of the 45th general election. Free and fair elections are a cornerstone of Canada's democracy, and the government has been planning diligently to protect the integrity of our election and defend against foreign interference. Today, I'll be sharing with you how the government will address threats and how we will communicate with Canadians during the election period if foreign interference is detected. Vanessa Lloyd parlera brièvement du paysage des menaces.
Vanessa Lloyd will speak briefly about the threat landscape. We will then open it up for questions from media in the room and online.
Marie-Josée Hogg stated in her final report on foreign interference in federal electoral processes and democratic institutions that Canada's democratic institutions have remained robust and that the Government of Canada has responded to attempts at foreign interference with measures and mechanisms to better detect, deter, and counter them.
Justice Ogg further states that the measures implemented indicate that the government is prioritizing the fight against foreign interference.
One of these measures has been the critical election incident public protocol, which was activated again yesterday with the issuance of the writs. This
protocol guides how we inform Canadians during the writ period if there is an incident or incidents that threaten Canada's ability to have a free and fair election.
The purpose of the protocol is to provide Canadians with enough information about any such incident so they can make an informed decision when they cast their vote. Maintaining trust in our electoral system is paramount. The protocol
is consistent with the Caretaker Convention, which calls for restraint on the part of the government during the writ period, while ensuring effective continuity of government.
Communications with Canadians under the protocol will only occur in exceptional circumstances, ones that could impair Canadians' ability to have a free and fair election. The decision to communicate about an incident or incidents will be up to the panel of senior deputy ministers within the public service. The panel is comprised of the Clerk of the Privy Council, the National Security and Intelligence Advisor to the Prime Minister, the Deputy Minister of Justice and Deputy Attorney General, the Deputy Minister of Public Safety, and the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs. Les titulaires de ces postes mettent à
These officials bring to bear their experience and key perspectives on national security, foreign affairs, democratic governance, and legal matters.
Since the start of 2024, the panel has met regularly to prepare for this general election. They have received briefings from Canada's security and intelligence community on new and evolving threats and have had a number of discussions about the protocol and how it is applied.
We know that maintaining a timely flow of information is critical.
During the general election period, the panel will continue to receive regular intelligence briefings from Canada's national security agencies through the Security and Intelligence Threats to Election Task Force, also known as SITE. Le groupe de travail est notre principal mécanisme.
The SITE task force is our principal mechanism to monitor the threat of foreign interference during elections.
The Canadian Security Intelligence Service, which currently serves as chair, the Communications Security Establishment Canada, Global Affairs Canada, and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Working together, the SITE task force coordinates the collection and analysis efforts concerning threats to Canada's federal election and by-election processes.
Each member agency works within their respective mandate to monitor and address threats of foreign interference.
Based on the intelligence SITE provides, the panel will assess whether a threat meets the threshold for a public announcement. This decision must be weighed very carefully. Public discourse and disagreement are a healthy part of our democracy, and the panel is mindful of the importance of freedom of expression.
And we want to avoid elevating or drawing unnecessary attention to a minor incident that could produce negative consequences or unwarranted alarm.
To this end, the panel will weigh various elements such as the scope and scale of the incident, the source, credibility, and lifespan of the information, whether other societal mechanisms are already addressing the issue, the novelty and timeframe of the incident, and the potential impact on the election integrity. The panel's threshold for public communication is high. This is important to ensure that communication about an incident does not, in and of itself, become a disruption to or an influence in the election outcome. A public announcement could also inadvertently serve a foreign state's goal to sow discord and discredit democracy. Une démocratie forte dépend de l'accès.
A strong democracy depends on Canadians having access to a wide range of reliable news and information. This helps them form opinions, hold governments and individuals accountable, and take part in public debates.
Safeguarding free and open dialogue is essential. Canadians need to be able to discuss the issues that matter most during election campaigns. So I want to be very clear. The panel is not evaluating individual opinions or perspectives. They will be looking for instances of interference, disinformation, and other malign actions, not legitimate public influence. For example, public figures stating their support for one candidate or another does not constitute interference. It is considered a personal opinion. Foreign interference includes deliberate and covert activities by foreign groups, state actors, or individuals to advance their interests, often to the detriment of Canada's national interests. It is also important to note that attribution of an interference instance or attempt is not a determining factor for the panel. First and foremost, the panel is concerned with whether an incident could impact Canada's ability to have a free and fair election. Le seuil élevé pour le groupe d'experts face une annonce.
The high threshold for the panel to make an announcement is important to avoid unintended effects of a panel intervention. But we know that there may be instances of interference that don't meet that threshold to make a public announcement. While the protocol is not the right vehicle to address those instances, they cannot be left unchallenged. Transparency, openness, and greater public awareness are some of our strongest tools to fight interference.
The government will communicate regularly about the threat landscape during the election period. We will continue to hold these technical briefings and provide the latest updates and address your questions throughout the election period. Comme l'a déclaré la juge.
As Justice Hogue stated, countering foreign interference is a challenge that all of us who live in Canada must confront together.
Leading up to the election, government officials met with members of the social media platforms and tech companies to discuss our shared commitment to free, fair, and secure elections. These discussions will be ongoing during the election period. We will be looking to these companies to uphold their commitments, actively prevent the spread of fake information, and correct disinformation on their platforms. The government continues to be supportive of efforts by these companies to increase the transparency, authenticity, and integrity of their systems and help safeguard our elections. Par ailleurs, les Canadiens ont la responsabilité.
Canadians also have a responsibility to protect themselves and each other from threats to democracy.
An informed and resilient public is the best way to fight disinformation. That's why the government has developed tools and resources to help identify, stop the spread of, and report these threats. These resources are available on the Democratic Institutions website and outlined in the backgrounders we've issued today. Nous encourageons tous les électeurs.
We encourage all voters to be aware of the landscape so they can properly prepare against threats.
The Communications Security Establishment Canada has recently put out their report on cyber threats to Canada's democratic processes. The report offers an important update to the 2023 report in light of the rapid advancements in artificial intelligence observed since its publication. Foreign interference is top of mind for many Canadians. I want to close by emphasizing that we have robust plans in place to protect the 45th general election, inform the public, and empower Canadians to exercise their voting rights fairly and securely. Je tiens à conclure.
I want to close by emphasizing that we have robust plans in place to protect the 45th general election, inform the public, and empower Canadians to exercise their voting rights fairly and securely.
We'll continue to update the media throughout the election campaign as things develop. I will now turn to Vanessa Lloyd, Deputy Director of Operations at CSIS and current Chair of SITE, to speak to the current national threat landscape.
Thank you, Lorianne. Bonjour à tous.
Hello, everyone.
Mentioned, in preparation for regular briefs of information and intelligence to the panel, Site members are constantly monitoring the threat landscape and have completed an assessment ahead of the 45th general election. The task force reflected on what threat activity has been previously observed in Canada and what could occur in this year's election. Site's assessment process involves gathering insights from all the member organizations, allowing us to form a comprehensive understanding of a threat actor's capabilities and potential actions. Under its mandate, Site considered both foreign interference and violent extremist threats. In 2025, there is a substantial amount of information in the public domain on both types of threats and on how they can potentially manifest in Canada. Au nom du groupe de travail,
on behalf of the Site Task Force, I encourage Canadians to seek out and be informed by publications from Site agencies, either through links on the Government of Canada's Democratic Institutions website or by visiting the sites of each of the 4 task force members. This information is also available in the newsreels and background information provided to the media. For example, for information on how hostile state actors leverage artificial intelligence tools, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity has recently published its Cyber Threats to Canada's Democratic Process Update for 2025.
the information considered by Site pre-election can also be used by all of us Canadians to better understand the potential for a range of threat activity during the election, and how we can use new and existing tools and publications to protect ourselves. For example, information we will share today, when paired with the Canadian Security Intelligence Service publication Foreign Interference in You, which outlines common foreign interference techniques and what individuals and organizations can do to mitigate.
We have been listening into government representatives as they're discussing the measures in place to protect the integrity of Canada's 45th general election. Now, a panel has met since 2024, we heard, to ensure there's no interference in the federal election. That panel works with an established task force to protect the election. This includes detecting and reporting disinformation and measures being put in place to prevent or address interference. This is of heightened importance, just for context, as we just saw the results released a few weeks ago of a public inquiry studying foreign election meddling. And we heard the representative from the Privy Council there, Privy Council office, note the findings of that inquiry from the Commissioner, Marie-Josée Hogue. And in her final report, she said this, and it's important to take note of this as we parse through what we just heard. In my view, it is no exaggeration to say that at this juncture, information manipulation, whether foreign or not, poses the single biggest risk to our democracy. It is an existential threat. Okay, with that, I want to bring in the CBC's Mark Carcassole, because he's been looking through what we've just been hearing from those government representatives about foreign threats, disinformation, detecting it, and how voters can also stay savvy when it comes to what they're faced with.
Yeah, there was a little bit of both in there, Artie. What the SITE, the Security and Intelligence Threats to Elections Task Force, is doing to help protect the election and keep it fair and safe and free, but also what the public can do. There's a large onus on the public, too, from officials. But first, let's talk about the responsibilities of SITE, because that was a major part of Justice Hogue's report as well, is laying out the powers that it has. And we heard Lori-Ann Kempton of the Privy Council office talk about the various responsibilities that SITE has in this upcoming election, weighing whether a threat constitutes disruption to a free election, for example. They will be monitoring the public discourse online, social media, for the scope and scale, the source and credibility of any potential threats. What their biggest responsibility is going to be is weighing what is a social media post, what is someone just exercising free speech, giving their opinion, public figures endorsing other figures, and what actually constitutes a threat to the safety of our election. She says that things like endorsements and stuff like that do not constitute threats to the election per se. What they are looking for is individuals, foreign actors trying to to influence the outcome of the election, trying to gain influence for their own needs. So they're going to find themselves having to weigh those various things. What is free speech? What is an actual threat? If it meets a threshold, which they say is a very high threshold, then the plan is to inform the public of specific threats. Let them know what is out there trying to potentially sway their vote, what is out there trying to misinform or disinform them.
Now, as we also gear up here for this 45th federal election, of course, the integrity of the process is one part of it, but also learning a little bit more about how the voting is being divided up, how ballots are being divided up, because there was another briefing talking a little bit about electoral boundaries, I believe.
Yes, just an hour before that, the Chief Electoral Officer of Elections Canada, Stéphane Perreault, talked about a number of things going into this election. As Arthi mentioned, electoral boundaries are one thing because there are 5 new ridings in this election. Every 10 years, the electoral boundaries across Canada are reevaluated due to population changes. And so this year there are 5 more districts, 3 in Alberta, 1 in BC, 1 in Ontario. So they're encouraging people to keep an eye out because whether you know it or not, you may be in a new electoral district this time around. So it's something to watch out for. They also talked about their efforts to engage Indigenous communities in this election, make it easier and more accessible for people in Indigenous communities to vote. They are reintroducing the Vote on Campus measure to make it easier for students and staff on campus to get out their votes as well. But Mr. Perreault also talked about election interference in his press conference earlier today as well. He acknowledged the O Commission, but something interesting that he mentioned is that a lot of the changes recommended in that commission, and there were 51, as much as we heard from the Privy Council Office of changes they have made, a lot of them have not been made going into this election. Here's why.
So the recommendations that pertain to Elections Canada were in fact recommendations that I made to Parliament and to the Commission, and Commissioner Hogg largely endorsed those recommendations, but they were recommendations for legislative changes. So we'll see when Parliament resumes if these are examined and come to fruition.
When Parliament resumes, that was the key phrase there. In short, because Parliament has been prorogued, a lot of this stuff which needs legislative approval has not been able to go through. Mr. Perreault talked about one of the biggest threats he sees going into this election is the use of AI, deepfakes, things like that. He says Elections Canada will have material on their website showing Canadians how to tell the difference between those things because, again, there's a big onus on us as voters to make sure that we are also well informed. And he also says, and it was mentioned in the press briefing that we were watching, Arthi, as well, that he has written out to all the major social media players, X, TikTok, and informed them about his concerns. He says that they are all on board. They're willing to work with the Canadian government to make sure this is a fair process. And he says he will make those letters back and forth public soon.
Okay, thank you for the update on this. That is the CBC's Mark Carcassol reporting. Okay, we do want to head to the campaign trail now. The leader of the Bloc Quebecois was in Quebec City today, and the U.S. trade war was front and center for Yves-François Blanchet. He says his party will introduce a bill in the next parliament that forces the federal government to only offer contracts to Canadian companies. The CBC's Rafi Boudjikanian is covering the Bloc campaign.
Yves-François Blanchet held his news conference in front of the American consulate to address the U.S. trade war. He promised that as soon as Parliament resumes, his party, the Bloc Quebecois, promises to introduce a private member's bill that would force the Canadian government to procure government contracts by going to Canadian and Quebec companies. As for the promises by rival Conservative and Liberal parties to introduce middle-income tax cuts, Blanchet only had this to say.
How the hell do you intend to do that? One of the parties says we will cut the expenses. Okay, is it the right time to cut the expenses when the moment is more appropriate to support enterprise companies and jobs? And the other party says we will cut expenses and we will cut taxes. There's no way on earth one can manage that. You have to get more income to spend more. And if you do only cut and cut and cut, you will have to tell us where you will make those cuts. So it seems like instead of Mr. Carney convincing Mr. Poilievre to have a program, Mr. Poilievre has convinced Mr. Carney to have only slogans.
Blanchet started the last election campaign in 2021 saying he would send 40 Bloc Quebecois MPs to Parliament. That's more than half the number of seats available in Quebec. He's being more guarded this time around. Polls suggest the Bloc Quebecois could be squeezed out in the national debate about who is best placed to handle the economic threats represented by U.S. President Donald Trump. Rafi Boudjikanian, CBC News, Quebec City.
Well, meanwhile, the Green Party has also kicked off its campaign. Jonathan Pedneau is the national face, with Elizabeth May serving as co-leader. At the campaign launch in Montreal yesterday, the Green Party positioned itself as the only party committed to real climate action and reiterated that the stakes of this election are higher than ever.
My friends, the threat is real. We cannot afford to sit this one out. We must vote now, as though our country depends on it, because more than ever before, it does.
The party unveiled a 38-point plan focusing on environmental policies and economic resilience against Trump's administration. The plan includes a review of the F-35 fighter jet deal between Canada and the U.S. The leaders also slammed Mark Carney for scrapping the consumer carbon tax, saying it shows the Liberals are moving to the right, and they said Carney is, quote, starting to look like a progressive conservative. Okay, so as the campaigning gets underway, the stakes couldn't be higher. For more on the messaging, we have reached Jennifer Stewart. She's a strategic communications expert and CEO of Syntax Strategic, a national communications agency. Jennifer, thank you for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Arthi.
Okay, what have you observed so far in terms of the strategy? We're about 24 hours in.
24 hours in, and we've got two very different pitches to Canadians. We have Mr. Poilievre, who came out swinging yesterday. He's painting a Carney-led Liberal government as Trudeau 4.0. He's saying it's the same cabinet, it's the same insiders, it's the same playbook. His message yesterday, though, was clear. It's time for change. Mr. Poilievre hit hard on the cost of living, on the lack of affordability for housing and taxes, all the pressure points that Canadians are feeling. But he also blamed the Liberals for Canada being too reliant on the U.S., saying that he would, as leader, ensure that we were less reliant on the U.S. Mark Carney, he's trying to rebrand the Liberals. He distanced himself from Trudeau's record and signaled some pretty big shifts. He's scrapping the carbon tax, he's reversing the capital gains changes. So it was a clear effort to say, this is not the same Liberal Party. This is not the same brand.
Let's talk a little bit about the two approaches then that we're seeing from the perceived frontrunners in this federal election. And let's start with what we're seeing from the Conservative Party leader. We know, for example, there's been a new strategy that the campaign is employing, and that is to not have reporters come aboard and travel along with the leader, which is somewhat unprecedented. We haven't seen that. Typically, we know reporters do travel along with party leaders on the campaign trail. And we know that there has been a lot of discipline in terms of the Conservative Party on staying on track. So let's first talk about their strategy, and then we'll move over to the Liberals.
Yeah, absolutely. So message discipline isn't just important, Arthi, it's everything. So what we're seeing from Mr. Poilievre's camp is a really stringent approach to media relations. He is trying to manage the message. You will see sound bites that he has orchestrated, that his team has orchestrated, that are coming directly from press events. And what this does is it really works to contain the message. One could argue it lacks authenticity, it lacks off-the-cuff conversations that otherwise could happen if media were on the campaign trail, but he's trailing in the polls, which is a surprise to the Conservatives. So they've clearly made a strategic decision that everything is going to be a soundbite. Everything is going to reinforce a message that they, as the Conservatives, have decided is important. And the goal then would be for that sustained message to reach Canadians over and over and over again and avoid any blunders.
Now, we know when we're talking about strategy here, Pierre Poilievre has been the Conservative Party leader for a few years now, I believe 2022. And then you've got Mark Carney. He does not have political experience in this regard, specifically when we're talking about campaigning. How much of a shift will this be, and what are you seeing so far in terms of maybe challenges?
I think it's a really significant shift. Look, when you're going from the business world to politics, the messaging changes. You're not in a boardroom. You can't speak off the cuff. Like I said before, message discipline is everything. And he's against an opponent that has operated in the political realm for well over a decade, and quite frankly is a strong communicator. So we've seen some shifts. He clearly is being trained, but we've also seen some slip-ups where, you know, he's come across a bit defensive. He's gone off script. He's taken a few things personally. His team needs to rein that in immediately and ensure that he's well scripted, he's messaged, and he's prepared for questions from the media that, you know, he may take personal offense to, but he needs to be ready to react to and then pivot very quickly back to the message of the party and what they're going to do for Canadians, and more importantly, how they're going to manage U.S.-Canadian relations.
Okay, and Jennifer, let's talk about promises too. You know, right out of the gates, we're seeing tax cuts be announced by both the Conservative and Liberal parties when it comes to income tax. But then when we look at the NDP, their initial announcement today that we saw was on housing and affordable housing. What do you make of the focus on each of these?
Look, I think at the end of the day, a lot of Canadians are hurting financially. And while everybody is concerned with what is happening south of the border and the tariffs and the trade war, we do need life in Canada to be more affordable. So we are going to continue to see promises and messages reinforced about tax cuts, about making life more affordable, about putting money back in the pocketbooks of Canadians. It's easy to say that when you are on the campaign trail. How you reconcile those federal books after the fact and still have a thriving economy that you can invest in is another thing. So it's politics 101, Arthi. Canadians want to see more money in their pocketbooks. But frankly, my advice would be to keep it high level. How are we going to invest in the economy in a time when that is absolutely necessary? And how are we going to break down trade barriers to do so and support businesses?
And I do want to also ask you, because it's come up multiple times in our conversation and certainly already on the campaign trail, and that is the Trump factor, the U.S. president, and the threat, of course, and also the implementation of tariffs, the threat to sovereignty. We've seen different sort of strategies in order to deal with Trump. We heard today from the Liberal Party leader, him saying, you know, I'm open to talk, but on our terms when our sovereignty is respected. And we've also seen Pierre Poilievre position himself as the strongest person to speak or contend with the U.S. president as well, although we are hearing sort of this conflicting message from Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith when she appeared on Breitbart, a U.S. media agency, suggesting that Pierre Poilievre aligns better with perhaps the U.S. president's goals here. So how does this all come into play?
Look, I don't think any leader from a communications perspective should be seen pandering to President Trump. I've said this before to you, I believe. Bullies respond to strength, and right now we need an adult in the room who appears prime ministerial and is ready to have an engaged, economically focused conversation with the president. So I would say Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Carney at this point are using the same playbook with respect to how they engage with Trump, and they're really setting the terms with respect to how and when those conversations take place and what they're willing to put up with.
And finally, I wanted to ask you, Jennifer, in terms of the NDP, because we've talked a lot about the Conservatives and Liberals. In terms of the NDP, to gain ground here, they started out by having an announcement today about housing and affordable housing. Is that necessarily the messaging that is going to help them build momentum, because they have been losing it over the past few years?
I don't think that is the messaging that's going to help, if I'm being quite frank with you, Arthi. They need to be focused on economic unity and our sovereignty as a nation. They need to be seen as a viable alternative to the Liberal Party, and focusing on one specific issue is not going to do that. Look, lots can change over the course of an election, but right now this is a two-horse race, and the NDP aren't even acting like they're in the race.
Jennifer, I want to thank you for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Jennifer Stewart is a strategic communications expert and CEO of Syntax Strategic. The race to choose Canada's next Prime Minister is in full stride today. The main party leaders have fanned out across the country to make their pitches. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre is in Brampton, Ontario today, and the CBC's Kate McKenna is there. She joins me now live. Hey, Kate. So why did Poilievre choose to be in Ontario and in Brampton today? What's the message there?
Well, the Conservatives feel that their issue set plays very well in the GTA where we are right now because, of course, they're focusing on crime, stopping crime, putting more controls on immigration levels, and, of course, the cost of housing. So these are issues that are very important to lots of Canadians, but particularly those here in the GTA, according to the Conservatives. And today, Pierre Poilievre was out speaking about his message when it comes to income tax. He says he's going to lower income tax in the lowest bracket by 2.25 percentage points. He says that's going to save an average person on average, about $900 a year. Here's what he said earlier today.
I'm announcing that Canada First Conservatives will cut income taxes by 15% for the average worker, or $2,000 for the average couple. This is a tax cut for seniors who are drawing their pension or retirement income. They will pay, on average, 15% less. This is a tax cut for the workers behind me, who will pay 15% less on their income tax. This is a tax cut for the waitress, for the welder, for the barber.
And so he was out today. He says that is going to cost about $14 billion to implement. It would be fully implemented in 2027 if he becomes Prime Minister. And he's been putting in the window for some time that he planned to cut income taxes. But just yesterday, Liberal candidate Mark Carney said he would also cut income taxes by only 1 percentage point in that lowest bracket. But Pierre Poilievre is really hammering home his message of affordability, saying he's the person best suited to bring the cost of living down for Canadians, and he's sharing that message here in Brampton.
And Kate, we saw there that he was in Brampton, Ontario this morning, as you pointed out. What's next for the Poilievre campaign?
Well, he's holding a photo opportunity in Mississauga in about an hour. They're going to a Polish deli. And we also know that he's planning to be in the GTA tomorrow as well, first in this area and then heading to Hamilton. So they had a very large rally last night in North York. It attracted probably about 2,000 people. It was very difficult to count, but that's the best I could do. They say that this is a very competitive area. Public opinion pollings indicate that it is neck and neck in Ontario, and we can expect to see Pierre Poilievre come here quite a bit over the campaign.
Thanks for this, Kate. That's the CBC's Kate McKenna in Brampton, Ontario. There are 343 ridings across the country for this upcoming general election. Of those ridings, 32 are in the 4 Atlantic provinces. Affordability and looming tariffs are among the key issues for that part of the country. And the CBC's Brett Ruskin is in Halifax tracking what voters say are important to them.
Here on the East Coast, Atlantic Canadians care about the types of things that most other Canadians do as well. Housing availability and affordability top of mind, perhaps, for voters as we begin this election campaign. Some of the fastest growing cities are here on the East Coast. Taking a look at Charlottetown, Moncton, Halifax here has been one of the fastest growing over the last couple of years. And so more people means more need for housing. It'll be interesting to see what types of promises federal leaders make to make housing more available, more affordable for voters here. Another topic of discussion could be defense spending. Here in Halifax, there's the Irving Shipbuilding Project that's been constructing the Arctic and offshore patrol ships, soon to be constructing the River-class destroyers. Those are going to be coming online in the 2030s and beyond. And so the most recent announcement around that project was the first $8 billion towards that River-class destroyer project. That's in Nova Scotia. Meanwhile, in New Brunswick, we have CFB Gagetown, the second largest military facility in the country, supporting lots of jobs in the Oromocto region and the Fredericton region. In Nova Scotia, once again, there's an important air base too, CFB Greenwood. That's going to be the future home of Canada's East Coast drone fleet. That's going to be a $2.5 billion project that comes online in the early 2030s as well. So a couple of the topics that are being discussed here as we head into this election campaign. Speaking of heading into it, we are looking at the polling that is being done, the public polling being aggregated by CBC's poll tracker. So you take a look 3 months ago, December 23rd versus March 23rd. December 23rd, the Liberals are polling around 27% of public support. That was behind the Conservatives at around 46%. But take a look at what's happened over the last 3 months. There has been a surge in support for the Liberal Party, jumping from 27% to 50%. Atlantic Canada now leading in the country in terms of Liberal support. That's come at the expense of support for the Conservatives and for the NDP. So that's a snapshot of what we're looking at here in Atlantic Canada as we begin this campaign. Brett Ruskin, CBC News, Halifax.
And we have been talking to Canadians across the country about the election issues that matter most to you. Here's what some voters in Montreal told CBC News over the weekend.
Obviously, our sovereignty is under attack. That is a big issue right now.
Immigration would be the major issue, along with the economy and the tariffs, resolving the tariffs with the U.S.
Like the cost of living right now in Montreal, it's over the roof, honestly.
They have to look for the middle class people. Usually, if something happened wrong, they are suffer, most of them. So have to care about this thing. And old people.
I think helping women and children be safe and get into shelters is what's most important, taking people off the streets.
Okay, so those are some thoughts from voters in Montreal. As with all federal elections, Quebec is a key and very interesting battleground. It has the second highest number of ridings in the country, and polls suggest voter support for the Bloc may be waning amid a surge of Canadian nationalism. The CBC's Vanessa Lee has more.
As Quebecers tap into a time-honored tradition, David Lessard is showing his true colors.
I always have been Canadian first. I'm a Quebecer, but I'm first a Canadian.
Lessard is a fifth-generation maple syrup producer from Saint-Joseph-des-Érables, southeast of Quebec City. He wants the next Prime Minister to stand up for Canada.
To defend our identity and our tradition.
There has been a surge in patriotism here over the past few weeks. A recent poll found the percentage of Canadians saying they have a deep emotional attachment to the nation shot up the most in Quebec.
The reaction again to what happened with south of the border with the Trump administration matters a lot to Quebecers because we know we sell aluminum, we have lumber.
With 78 seats up for grabs, Quebec is once again shaping up to be a key battleground.
Monsieur Trudeau had poor numbers in Quebec, so you remove him from the equation, it helps the Liberals.
Current projections have the Liberals in the lead over the Bloc Quebecois, with the Conservatives in third place.
I read Newton. What goes up goes down. If that's good for me,
That's good for Mr. Carney. Let's see.
Support for Quebec separatism has declined dramatically, but the annexation threat puts its linguistic and cultural survival at stake.
Everybody in Quebec knows that in Canada, they have a very specific place, a protected place, official languages, Charter of Rights, constitutional guarantees. Mr. Trump just signed an executive order which said English is the only official language in the United States.
With Quebec voters known to be unpredictable when it comes to federal politics, the path to victory for any party won't be easy. Vanessa Lee, CBC News, Montreal.
Canada's identity and culture are really front and center for many voters in this election. Today, a long-standing symbol of that identity is starting to sell off most of its inventory. The oldest retail company in the country, Hudson's Bay, has begun liquidation sales. The CBC's Scott Peterson has more.
Today starts the liquidation of Hudson's Bay across the country. All stores are going to be closed except for 6 right now. And to show you how quickly this process is evolving, Hudson's Bay wants to have everything liquidated by June the 15th. And here's a footnote as well to anyone having gift cards. Those have to be used by April 6th, or they'll be null and void. But the underlying concern here is that 9,300 jobs are expected to be lost or in a position to be lost. And there's worry about severance for a lot of these employees, some of them long-term employees of Hudson's Bay, and will any severance be paid whatsoever. Now, the 6 stores that are expected to be saved from liquidation now, 3 stores in Toronto, including the flagship Yonge and Queen location, Yorkdale Mall, Hillcrest Mall, as well as 3 locations in Montreal. Now, so far, HBC has been surprised at the amount of vigorous sales of its merchandise, whether it be cups or mugs or blankets with the iconic stripes on it. And so it's a sad day, being the first full day of the campaign trail, as this iconic institution that Canada has known for all of its inception, going back 355 years, was part of the founding of the country, really. So a sad day starting today for the liquidation of all but 6 stores of Hudson's Bay. Scott Peterson, CBC News, Toronto.
Okay, with that, let's now check in on North American financial markets and see how the trading week is getting started. First off, we'll take a look at how things are looking in Toronto. The TSX is up 316 points on the day, while in New York, the Dow is up more than 500 and the NASDAQ is ahead nearly 360 points. We want to show you now the Canadian dollar. As you can see there, it is up slightly and closing in on 70 cents US again. Meanwhile, West Texas crude is up about 70 cents, trading at just shy of $69 a barrel, while gold is off nearly $12, though it's still trading above $3,000 an ounce.
This market update is brought to you by Emirates. Fly Emirates. Fly better.
You are looking live at Parliament. It is the first full day of campaigning in the federal election, and we know that major party leaders are holding events with affordability and relations with the United States being some of the main points of focus. This, of course, is the first full day of campaigning, but we know that voters will head to the polls on April 28th for Canada's 45th general election. There's much more coverage coming up right here on CBC News Network.